The ground beneath your feet is wet. Not the wet of mud or standing water, but something older and more patient than that, the wet of a world that does not yet know what dry land is supposed to feel like. The soil here is dark and rich, pressed flat by the weight of grasses that grow knee-high in every direction, and when you take a step, the earth gives slightly beneath you, as though something beneath the surface is breathing, as though the land itself is undecided about whether it wants to be ground at all. The wind comes from the northwest. It carries cold in it, the kind of cold that arrives before the ice does, a warning written in temperature, and the grasses bend together in long, slow waves that move like the surface of a shallow sea, which, not so long ago, is exactly what this was. You are standing in a place that has no name yet. It will not have a name for another 10,000 years, at which point the water will have swallowed it completely, and by then the people who once crossed it will have carried their languages south and east and inward, and no word in any of those languages will preserve the memory of this particular patch of wet grass and grey sky and wind. But that is later. That is the future, which is someone else's problem. Right now, in the morning of this unnamed world, you are here. The sky above you is enormous and pale, the kind of sky that exists only where there are no hills to interrupt it, and far to the west, perhaps 2 days' walk, you can make out the suggestion of darker land rising from the flatness. To the east, the same. You are somewhere in the middle of something, a bridge, though you do not think of it as a bridge. You think of it as the world, because for the people moving across it, for the animals that grazed its grasses and the birds that rested in its marshes, it was simply the world. Ground, grass, wind, people. The reliable cold of a sky that had been grey for as long as anyone alive could remember. You breathe in. The air smells of salt and wet earth and something green and alive. The particular green aliveness of places where land and sea have recently negotiated a truce. In 3,000 years, the sea will win that negotiation. But for now, the land is here, and so are you, and the morning is just beginning to lighten in the east. And somewhere in the tall grass, a bird you do not recognize is making a sound that is somewhere between a whistle and a question. Let it carry you. There is time. There is, in this moment, nothing but time. The place you are standing has existed, in various forms, for nearly 10,000 years. It has been tundra and grassland and shallow marsh and open steppe. It has been frozen in winter and soft in the brief summers that come this far north. It has been walked across by people who did not know they were making history, by mammoths who did not know they were among the last of their kind, by horses and bison and reindeer moving in their slow seasonal rhythms, following grass the way rivers follow gravity. The land bridge you are crossing connects two worlds that will, in geologic terms soon, become separate continents. To the west lies what will one day be called Eurasia, the vast cold steppe of what is now Siberia, the forests of the east, the great empty middle of a continent that stretches all the way to the warm seas of the south. To the east lies what will one day be called the Americas, a continent so large and so various that it will take thousands of years for the descendants of the people crossing here to explore even its edges. Neither of those names exists yet. The people moving through this corridor do not think in terms of continents. They think in terms of this valley and that ridge, this river crossing and that hunting ground, this season and the one coming behind it. You have been walking for 11 days. Your feet know the ground now in the way that feet can only learn ground after long acquaintance, the way the soft places feel before you put your weight on them, the particular give of frost-thawed soil in the morning versus the firmer surface it becomes by afternoon. You know which grasses mark the edge of marshy ground. You have learned to read the light in the western sky in the evening and make reasonable guesses about what the morning will bring. The group travelling with you, a family, or something close enough to family that the distinction does not matter, has settled into the quiet efficiency of people who have been moving together long enough that speech is mostly unnecessary. The woman who walks ahead of you carries a bundle on her back that contains everything she considers essential. The two children stay close, not from fear exactly, but from the practiced awareness of small people in open country. The older man at the rear moves slowly, but has not once fallen behind. If you enjoy listening to sleepy prehistoric stories like this, subscribe. I post stories like this weekly. You are not the first people to walk this corridor. Others came before, in the generations above yours, their tracks long since swallowed by weather and new grass. And others will come after, following the same logic of seasonal movement and the same ancient pull toward whatever lies over the next rise. But you are here now, in this precise morning, with the sun just clearing the eastern horizon and lighting the tops of the tall grasses gold, and the world has the quality that early light gives to open places, the quality of something waiting to be seen for the first time. Close your eyes, or keep them open. Either way, let yourself be here. There is nowhere else to be. To understand where you are, you have to understand the water. The water is what made this place, and the water is what will take it away. Right now, in this moment you are walking through, the sea level of the world is lower than it will be in 3,000 years. Not dramatically lower, not the kind of difference that would seem obvious if you stood on a cliff and looked out at the horizon, but lower by enough. Lower by perhaps 60 or 70 meters compared to what the ocean will look like in the world your distant descendants will inhabit. And that difference, that modest withdrawal of the sea from the shore, has exposed this corridor of land connecting two massive continents. The Bering Land Bridge, as it will eventually be called, is not actually a bridge in any narrow sense. It is not a thin strip of ground threading between two bodies of water. It is a wide, open, flat to gently rolling landscape, perhaps 1,000 kilometers across from north to south at its widest. A place that would take months to cross in its full breadth. A place with its own weather and its own ecosystems, its own seasons and its own particular silences. Geologists in the far future will give this landscape a name: Beringia. They will piece together its existence from sediment cores and ancient pollen samples and the bones of animals found in places where no such animals should logically be, and they will slowly reconstruct the outlines of a world that vanished beneath the sea and left almost nothing behind except the people and the animals that crossed it and carried, in their bodies and their genes and their stories, some faint echo of the place they had come from. But that reconstruction is thousands of years away. Right now, Beringia simply is. It is not a concept or a theory or a geographic curiosity. It is ground. It is grass and wind and the smell of the sea coming from both directions on certain days when the wind shifts. The particular smell of cold salt water that you have grown up calling simply the edge of the world, because that is what the ocean is. From where you stand the edge, the limit, the place where the known gives way to the unknown, you stop for a moment on a slight rise. Not a hill exactly, just a gentle lifting of the ground that lets you see a little further in every direction. To the north, the land seems to flatten towards something darker, a suggestion of water that might be a wide, shallow lake or might be the beginning of the sea itself. To the south, the steppe opens up into a long sweep of grassland where, if you stand still and watch for long enough, you can see movement, a slow, dark shifting that resolves. When you shade your eyes against the morning light, into a herd of something large, moving in the particular unhurried way of animals that have nowhere specific to be, and all day to get there. The older man comes up beside you. He does not speak, but he looks in the direction you are looking, and after a moment he makes a small sound, not quite a word, more the sound of something confirmed, something expected, and you understand that he has been this way before, or something like this way, in the years before you knew him, and that the animals in the distance are familiar to him in the way that things are familiar when you have depended on them for a long time. There are mammoths in this world, not here, not right now in your line of sight, but close enough that the knowledge of them is always present. A background fact of existence, the way the cold is a background fact, the way the wind is. You have seen them, great shaggy shapes on the horizon, closer to walking hills than to anything you might call an animal, though animal is what they are, unmistakably, in the way that they move and eat and call to one another across distances that should, by rights, be too large for sound to cross. The mammoths of Beringia are not the largest mammoths that have ever lived. That distinction belongs to the great Columbian mammoths that range further south and east, animals that would make the ones you know look modest by comparison. But the woolly mammoths of this corridor are large enough, and old enough as a species, to carry in their bearing the particular dignity of creatures that have outlasted ice ages, and the slow heaving of continents, and the rise and fall of grasslands that once covered half the northern world. They will not outlast you, not your kind, specifically, but the combination of your kind and the warming that is already invisibly beginning will be too much for the great elephants of the north. In 10,000 years, the last of them will be gone, but that grief is not yours to carry today. Today the mammoths are there, in the middle distance, and the morning is cool and bright, and the grass bends in the wind, and your feet are learning this ground the way feet learn ground, when there is no choice but to keep moving. You step down from the rise and rejoin the others, and the walking resumes quiet and steady, the particular rhythm of people moving through a landscape they are starting to trust. The world between worlds holds you, for now, in its enormous unhurried hand. Think about that phrase, the world between worlds, and let it expand in your mind. You are between two continents, yes, between the world you came from and the world you are going toward. But you are also between other things, between ice ages, in the warming gap that will eventually close the corridor, between the time when this ground was sea and the time when it will be sea again, between the world before humans walked this way and the world after, which will be fundamentally different because humans did. And you are between, in the most intimate sense, the person you were before this crossing began and the person you will be when it is done. Walking changes people, not in dramatic ways, not in ways that can be easily articulated, but the body that walks for 23 days through open country is not quite the same body that began. The mind that has spent 3 weeks reading landscape, reading weather, reading animals and rivers and the faces of the people around it, is not quite the same mind. Something has settled. Something has been worn away. Something has been built that was not there at the beginning. This is the oldest form of education, not the transmission of information from one person to another, but the education that the world gives when you move through it slowly enough to let it do its teaching. The world is teaching you right now. It has been teaching you since the first morning of the crossing, and it will be teaching you on the last morning, and the curriculum is the world itself, everything that is here, everything that happens, the whole vast patient classroom of Beringia unfolding under your feet one step at a time. What might it feel like to walk through a place that no living person will ever walk again? Let that question settle into your breathing. There is no urgency in it. It is a question that opens rather than presses, a question designed to let your thoughts drift rather than concentrate. The grass bends, the wind moves through it. The distant animals are gone over the horizon. The day is still young. Keep walking. The morning is still bright, and there is much of this world still to show you. The ground is patient beneath your feet, and the sky is patient above, and the whole enormous corridor of Beringia is patient in the way of things that have been here for 10,000 years and have another 3,000 years left before the sea takes them. You step forward into it, one step at a time. Each step landing on ground that was here before you and will be hereafter. Each step a small temporary claim on a landscape that belongs finally to no one. This is what it is to be alive in a world this large. To be small in it, and moving through it, and held by it, and returned by it, each day, to the ordinary necessary miracle of the next morning. The ice is behind you. That is the first thing to understand about why anyone would walk across a land bridge at all. It is not that the people crossing Beringia are adventurers in any romantic sense, people who look at unknown horizons and feel a pull toward them. The pull is real enough, but it is not the pull of adventure. It is the pull of necessity, the particular gravity of being alive in a world that is changing faster than any living person can fully comprehend, and of following the logic of survival wherever that logic leads. Behind you, to the west, the great ice sheets of the last glacial maximum are retreating. They have been retreating for thousands of years now, slowly and unevenly, advancing in bad winters and falling back in warmer seasons. But the trend across the generations has been unmistakable to people who live close enough to the land to read its changes, the way you might read the condition of an animal you have hunted for years. The ice is going. Where it was, there will be new land, raw and bare, slowly colonized by the tough pioneer plants that move in ahead of the forest, the mosses and sedges and wind-bent shrubs that do not mind cold and bare rock and the particular desolation of recently glaciated ground. But before the ice retreated, when it was at its greatest extent, it locked up so much of the world's water that the oceans fell. This is the mechanism simple in principle, vast in consequence. Water evaporates from the sea, falls as snow in the cold north, accumulates as ice that does not melt in summer because the summers are not warm enough, and over thousands of years the ice grows and the sea shrinks, and the shorelines of every continent shift outward onto what was seafloor, exposed now to the air for the first time since the last such period. muddy and flat, and gradually, over centuries, finding its way towards something like life. Beringia is the most famous product of this process, but it is not the only one. All over the world, during the glacial maximum, coastal areas that are now underwater were then dry land. People walked across what is now the Persian Gulf. They crossed what is now the South China Sea, moving island to island on land that is now deep ocean. They spread along coastlines that have since been swallowed, leaving behind campsites and middens and hearths that archaeologists will never find because they are under 100 meters of water. Here in Beringia, you are walking across what will one day be the bottom of the Bering and Chukchi seas. If you could see the seafloor as it will look after the ice melts, you would recognize in its contours the shapes of the landscape you are moving through now, the gentle valleys that are now submarine channels, the slight rises that are now underwater ridges, the places where the ground dips toward what was once a wetland. The sea does not so much erase as rearrange, and in the arrangement of the seafloor in the far future, geologists will find Beringia's ghost. You do not know any of this. You know only the practical geography of the world you inhabit, where the water is now, where the ground is firm, which directions lead toward better hunting, and which lead toward the kind of terrain that is difficult to cross with children and a loaded pack. You know, in the accumulated knowledge of your group and the groups before you, something about the land to the east, not as a destination exactly, but as a direction that is possible, a direction that others have gone, and from which they have not returned, not to tell you about it anyway. And the not returning could mean many things. Consider what it means to carry knowledge about the sea level in your body without knowing you are doing it. The older man in your group does this. He knows, in the way that experienced travellers know things, that water was once here and will return. He reads it in the slight alkaline smell of the soil in certain low places, in the shells of marine creatures found far from any present shore, in the particular way the sediment layers when he cuts into the earth at a riverbank. These are not conclusions he has drawn from abstract reasoning. They are things he knows the way you know how to walk, accumulated through a lifetime of paying attention to the world as it actually is, rather than as any single explanation of it might suggest. The woman who walks ahead of you stops and crouches, and you stop too, and the children stop without being told, because this is something everyone who travels together learns quickly. When someone stops to look at the ground, you stop and wait and keep quiet until you understand what they are seeing. She is looking at tracks, not fresh. The edges are softened by weather, perhaps a day old, perhaps two, but large. Spreading across the wet ground in a pattern that takes a moment to resolve into meaning and then resolves all at once. The wide, deeply impressed oval of a mammoth's foot, the pad and the toenails both leaving their separate marks in the dark soil, the whole print the size of a cookpot lid, pressed perhaps 4 or 5 centimeters into the earth by the weight above it. There was one animal, moving from northwest to southeast, moving from the spacing of the prints, at a steady unhurried walk, the gait of something that is not hunting and is not being hunted, something that is simply moving from one place to another, because that is what the morning requires. You study the tracks for a while. The older man reads them differently than you do where you see information. He seems to see something more, a narrative, a life implied by the weight and direction and timing of each step. After a moment he straightens and looks to the southeast, in the direction the animal went, and then he looks at the sky, and then he looks at you, and something passes between you that is not quite speech, but carries the weight of a decision. You will not follow this animal today. The decision is that simple. There are other priorities, other directions, and the mammoth is moving away from where you are going rather than toward it. But the presence of the tracks shifts something in the quality of the air around you. The way the presence of large animals always does makes the landscape feel occupied, inhabited, places you in a web of other lives and other movements that were here before you arrived and will continue after you leave. This is a world full of others. Not just the people who crossed before you, whose traces you sometimes find in the form of old hearths and discarded stone flakes, and not just the mammoths and the horses and the woolly rhinoceroses and the cave lions that move through this corridor on their own seasonal schedules. But the smaller things too, the foxes that have been watching your group from a distance with the particular attentiveness of animals that have learned to associate people with scraps, the lemmings that rustle invisibly in the grass, the birds that roost in the willows along the creek margins and take flight at your approach in clattering spirals. All of this is alive. All of it is moving, adjusting, following its own logic across a landscape that is itself moving, adjusting, following the slow logic of ice and water and the turning of the seasons. There is a paradox in the ice behind you that is worth sitting with for a moment. The ice that forced your ancestors to move is also the ice that made it possible to move. Without the glaciers locking the world's water into sheets that covered continents, there would be no land bridge. The very thing that made the old world untenable created the corridor into the new one. This is how it often goes. The force that closes one door is the same force that opens another. Though you cannot always see both doors from where you are standing, the glacier that sits to the northwest, still visible on clear days as a pale line at the edge of the sky, is a thing of immense age. It has ice at its centre that fell as snow before anyone now living was born, before their parents were born, before the grandparents of their grandparents were born. It has ice that is older than any human memory, older than any story that anyone in your group can tell, and yet it is melting. This permanent thing, this wall of the world, is slowly giving way to the warmth of a climate, doing what climates do over the centuries, shifting, finding new equilibriums, redistributing the world's ice and water according to rules that have nothing to do with any particular creature's survival. You are walking through the brief window of the land bridge's existence. You do not know this, but the land is already telling the story, if you know how to listen. The salt in the soil in the low places, the marine shells far from shore, the slight subsidence of the coastal ground, as if it knows already what is coming for it. You are not crossing an empty wilderness. You are crossing a world. The fact that this world will be gone in 3,000 years does not make it any less a world right now. The wind shifts slightly, coming now more from the north, carrying with it a freshness that suggests water, wide open water, somewhere not too far in that direction. You note it. You keep walking. The ice is behind you. The unknown is ahead. And the morning stretches out ahead of you like the grassland itself, wide and pale and full of the possibility of what might be seen from the next rise. The grass is the story. Everything else, the animals, the people, the wind, the sky, is just the grass expressing itself in other forms. You have been walking through it for 11 days now, and you have learned to read it the way people who live close to any one thing for long enough learn to read it. Not consciously, not in the way of someone making deliberate study, but in the background way that the body absorbs information, when information is the difference between walking confidently and putting your foot into something uncertain. You know which tufts mark wet ground. You know the particular way the grass moves in the hour before rain, a specific restlessness, a shivering that starts in the higher stalks and works downward, that is different from the ordinary movement of wind. You know that the shorter, denser patches usually mean drier ground beneath, which means firmer walking, which means the group instinctively steers toward them, without anyone saying anything about it. The grass of Beringia is a particular thing, adapted over thousands of years to the specific conditions of this corridor, the short summers and long winters, the permafrost not far below the surface that keeps the ground cold and prevents the deeper-rooted plants of warmer climates from establishing themselves, the consistent wind that has sculpted both the landscape and the plants that grow on it. It is not the lush green of temperate meadows. It is the tougher, drier, more patient grass of the north, brown gold for most of the year, green for a few brief months, growing in discrete tussocks rather than smooth carpets, with gaps between them where other plants fill in low willows, sedges, patches of heather, the occasional burst of wildflower in summer that looks, in the context of so much muted brown and grey, almost shockingly bright. What this grass does, what it has been doing for tens of thousands of years, is support. It supports the mammoths and the woolly rhinoceroses and the steppe bison, and the horses and the reindeer that move across Beringia in their seasonal migrations, converting the energy of the brief northern summers into animal bodies that then become the resource that sustains everything else. It is a thin margin, this grass, in the sense that the productive season is short and the winters are severe, and the animals that depend on the grass must be constantly moving to stay ahead of the places that have been eaten down and the places where the cold has locked, the food under ice. But it is a margin that has sustained life in enormous quantities for a very long time. You stop to pull up a handful of the dry grass, not with any particular purpose, just the idling gesture of hands that need something to do while the mind settles into the walking rhythm. You feel the dry fibre of it, The way it bends without breaking if you pull slowly, the particular roughness of the edge if you draw your thumb across it. In another season, this same grass is green and flexible and carries, when you pull it and hold it to your nose, a faint, fresh smell that is one of the clearest markers of summer in this part of the world. The older man watches you do this. Not with any judgment, just with the attention that old people who have moved through the world for a long time give to the small gestures of people around them, the noticing that comes naturally to those who have learned that the small gestures are often where the true information lives. He was born on the other side of this corridor, or close to it, born to the west, in the cold interior of what will one day be Siberia, where the winters are longer and darker and the summer light, when it finally arrives, has the quality of a gift withheld for too long. He has been moving east his whole life, not deliberately, not with a destination in mind, but following the logic of each successive season, following the grass and the animals that follow the grass, and following the people who follow the animals, and finding that east somehow is always where there is slightly more of what is needed. He does not talk much about this. He does not need to. It is written in the way he moves through the landscape, with the ease of someone who has long ago made peace with the idea that this is what life is: movement, following, adjustment, the perpetual recalibration of expectation against reality. What he carries in his head, in the portion of his memory dedicated to what might be called geography, is a detailed and accurate map of terrain he has crossed over 50 years of movement. He knows rivers by the way they smell as you approach them, before you can see them. He knows the difference between frozen ground that will hold your weight and frozen ground that will not. He knows which stars to follow in which seasons to maintain a generally eastward direction, and he knows the constellations by names that have no written form, that exist only in the spoken language of his people, which is itself a living thing that has shifted and changed across the generations he has been alive to hear it. The knowledge he carries will not survive in any written form. In 100 years after he is gone, the specific details of what he knew will have dispersed into the general knowledge of the people who knew him, diluted and transformed and recombined with the knowledge of others, until it is impossible to say where any particular piece of understanding came from. This is not a loss in any dramatic sense. This is simply how knowledge has always moved through the world, before writing. Before the impulse to fix things in permanent form, it moves through people. And people move, and the knowledge adapts to wherever the people find themselves. But right now, in this body, in this man moving steadily at the back of your group, that knowledge is intact and specific and astonishing in its depth. He could tell you if you had the language for it, and in some compressed way you do how many days' walk it is from the river you crossed yesterday to the next reliable water source. He could tell you, with reasonable confidence, what the weather will do in the next 2 days based on the specific quality of the cloud formations to the northwest this morning. He could tell you which roots are edible in which season, which berries are safe and which are not, how to find the bone that gives the most marrow with the least work to crack it. He is, in his own way, a library that breathes and walks and occasionally stops to look at the sky with an expression that contains everything he knows and cannot say. The grass bends around him. The wind passes through it in long rippling waves. Somewhere ahead, the land dips slightly toward a river that you can smell but not yet see, and the older man's pace has changed, slightly, almost imperceptibly, the way a pace changes when something expected is drawing close. You let go of the grass you were holding. It falls back among the other grass and is indistinguishable in a moment. The walking continues. The grass stretches on in every direction, patient and various, and feeding the world one blade at a time. And you wonder, in the quiet place that walking creates in the mind, what does it feel like to be the grass? To be rooted in a place you did not choose, to bend to whatever wind arrives, to be eaten and regrow, to be buried in winter and return in spring so reliably that the return itself has ceased to be a surprise and become simply the order of things. The older man stops to examine a patch of ground near a shallow depression where the soil has a darker quality, richer, more decomposed, the result of centuries of plant matter accumulating in a low spot where water rests after rain. He crouches and picks up a small clod of this darker earth and crumbles it between his fingers, smelling it, feeling its texture. The earth of Beringia is not all the same. The upland soils are thin and rocky, mineral and cold. But here, in the depressions and along the stream margins, The accumulation of 10,000 years of plant life has built something deeper, something that retains moisture even in dry weeks, something that would, given different circumstances, be able to grow almost anything. You think about soil the way you rarely think about it directly, as a thing with a history, as something made rather than simply present. The ground beneath your feet was once the bottom of a cold sea. Before that, it was exposed land like this, and before that, sea again, and before that, something else entirely. Every step you take is on a surface that has been through transformations you cannot imagine and will go through transformations you cannot predict. The permanence of the ground is one of the great useful illusions of the world. It seems fixed. It seems like the most basic given, the thing everything else rests on, but it is as much in motion as the water, as the ice, as the grass itself, just moving more slowly, on a timescale that makes the movement invisible from inside a single life. The question drifts away before you can answer it. The river smell is stronger now, the particular cool freshness of water in motion, and the children have noticed it and their pace has quickened slightly. And for a while the whole group moves with the easy momentum of people moving towards something necessary. The river is not what you expected. It is wider and shallower than the older man suggested, which means it is later in the season than you thought, the snow melt from wherever this river begins having already spent itself, and the water has pulled back from the high marks visible on the bank as pale lines in the darker earth, the record of earlier, higher water that is already weeks or months in the past. You stand at the edge and look across. The far bank is perhaps 30 meters away, close enough to see the individual plants growing there, a stand of willows with their characteristic drooping branch tips brushing the surface of the water, and behind them the same open steppe continuing in the same pale gold. There is nothing dramatic about the far bank. It is the same world as this bank. The river is just a river, one of dozens you have crossed in the past months, and yet you always pause at the edge of water, always take the time to read it before you cross, because water is the thing that can catch you off guard more completely than almost anything else in this landscape. The oldest child, a girl, perhaps 9 or 10 years old enough to have developed opinions about things, is already crouching at the edge, trailing her fingers in the current, testing its temperature and its pull. She has been doing this at every water crossing, as though she is accumulating data, building an internal model of rivers that she can compare against. She will be crossing rivers for the rest of her life, and the model she is building now will serve her for decades, updated with each new crossing, refined by the specific information of each new river she encounters. The water is cold, not ice water cold, but cold enough that you will want to cross quickly and dry off immediately on the other side, because wet clothing in a cold wind is a specific kind of misery that can, if the wind is strong enough and the temperature low enough, tip into something more serious than misery. You know this not from instruction but from experience from one crossing, years ago, where you misjudged the temperature and the depth and came out on the other side, shaking badly enough that the effort to start a fire was almost more than you could manage. The woman is already unpacking the oiled skin pouches from her bundle, the ones that will keep the fire-making materials dry if the worst happens. She does this without comment, without the suggestion that she is worried. Because worry is not what this is. It is just preparation. The same preparation you make before any crossing, the habit that keeps the small emergencies from becoming large ones. The older man finds a long branch, not quite long enough to be a proper walking staff, but enough to probe depth ahead of you, enough to give you a third point of contact with the riverbed when the current is pushing. He tests it against the bank, checking its strength, and seems satisfied with what he finds. You go first. This is not a rule exactly, but it has become the practice of this group, because you are a good swimmer and because you have a certain steadiness in moving water that has been noticed and trusted. You take off your footwear, the wrapped leather that has shaped itself, over months of wear, exactly to the form of your feet, and step into the water. The cold comes up around your ankles, your calves, your knees. The riverbed is gravel and smooth stones, good footing, the kind of bottom that lets you feel what you are stepping onto before you commit your weight. The current is not strong, but it is present, a constant gentle push at your legs that requires a continuous small adjustment to maintain direction. You pick your line, slightly angled, to use the current rather than fight it, and move across slowly, feeling for each step. Midway across, the water is at your hips, and the cold has moved up into your core, the particular cold that makes the breath come a little faster and the muscles tighten as though preparing for something. From here, you can see both banks simultaneously, and for a moment you are neither here nor there, you are in the river, belonging to neither side, suspended between the world you came from and the world you are going to. This is a feeling that, once you recognize it, you will find in many situations beyond river crossings. The feeling of being between seasons, between places, between the person you were before some significant experience and the person you are becoming after it. The river has made this feeling literal, made it physical and cold and wet, and there is something clarifying about that. The way that when something abstract becomes physical, it is suddenly much easier to understand. You reach the far bank, the gravel rises under your feet and then the mud, and then the grass, and you turn to watch the others cross. The woman comes next, carrying the bundle above her head, and she moves through the water with the confident efficiency of someone who is not afraid of rivers, but is also not casual about them. Then the children together, the older girl holding the younger one's hand, moving carefully, the younger one making a sound that is somewhere between protest and delight at the cold. Finally, the older man, using his branch, taking his time, not slow from weakness, but from the patience of someone who has learned that the difference between crossing a river well and crossing it badly is often just a matter of not hurrying. When everyone is on the far bank, there is the ordinary business of the crossing's aftermath, wringing out wet clothing, pulling grass to wipe the worst of the water from legs and feet, the woman producing a folded piece of dried meat from somewhere in her bundle and distributing it, and everyone sitting or crouching for a few minutes in the pale winter sun, letting the cold recede and the warmth of moving again take hold. The river continues past you, indifferent to the crossing, moving at its own tempo toward the sea. It does not know that one day, in 3,000 years, when the sea has risen and the corridor you are crossing has been swallowed, this river's lower reaches will be hundreds of meters below the surface of the ocean. The river does not plan for futures. It just moves, as it has always moved, from high ground to low, from cold to cold, from the mountains you cannot see to the sea you can sometimes smell. A thought surfaces, unbidden, in the quiet after the crossing. You wonder about the people who crossed before you, who crossed this same river or one very like it weeks or months or years ago, and whether they felt what you felt in the middle of the water, that moment of suspension, of belonging fully to neither bank, whether they carried that feeling with them into the new land, whether it changed them. You pull on your footwear. The older man is already standing, looking east, his expression the one it gets when the next day's walk is organizing itself in his mind. The children are ready, having recovered their energy with the efficiency that children have in this regard, the way they can be cold and uncomfortable one moment and completely over it the next. You stand. The river is behind you. The new ground is ahead. Keep walking. The afternoon is long, and the next camp is not yet in sight, and the walking is its own comfort, as it always is the reliable conversation between your feet and the earth, the steady rhythm that quiets the mind and lets the world come in. On the 14th day, you see the horses. Not one horse, or two, or the small scattered groups you have sometimes glimpsed at a distance, moving in their rapid gliding trot across the open steppe. A herd. Perhaps 200 animals, perhaps more, spread across a wide depression in the land to the south of your route, grazing with the total concentrated attention that large animals give to eating heads down, tails moving, the whole herd drifting in a slow collective arc that follows the best patches of remaining grass. You stop on the rise above them and watch for a long time. This is not an unusual thing to do. In a world without recorded information, without books or databases or archives of any kind, the watching of animals is one of the primary ways that knowledge is accumulated and confirmed. You watch horses not only because you might hunt them and need to understand their behavior, but because horses are information their condition tells you about the quality of the grazing in this area. Their direction of movement tells you something about what lies ahead. Their alertness or lack of it tells you about the presence or absence of predators you might not be able to see yet. These horses are calm. Their heads are down and they are eating steadily, which means there is nothing in the immediate vicinity that concerns them. The herd's collective mood, which you can read from a distance without being able to explain exactly how, is something between content and preoccupied the mood of animals that have enough food and enough safety, and are in the business of simply being horses, which is, It turns out, a substantial project that consumes most of their attention. The horses of Beringia are not quite the horses you will find in warmer, later climates. They are compact and heavily built, with thick necks and large heads, and the particular dense coat of a cold climate animal, layers of fine underwool beneath longer, coarser guard hairs, that together create an insulation system of remarkable efficiency. They are, in colour, various shades of dun and roan and bay, with darker legs and the faint striping on the shoulders and legs that sometimes appears in the coat of horses and that connects them, in a visual echo, to their distant ancestors. Their manes are upright and stiff in the manner of wild horses, nothing like the flowing manes of the domesticated animals that will exist in thousands of years in very different parts of the world. Domestication. The concept does not exist yet, not for horses. Somewhere, in other parts of the world, dogs are already in the process of becoming dogs. The long, gradual negotiation between wolves and humans that has been going on for tens of thousands of years, the extraordinary cross-species arrangement by which a predator became a companion, but horses are still fully themselves, fully wild, fully given over to their own calculations about where to be and when to move, and what the wind says about what is coming. The younger child has crept up beside you during the watching, drawn by whatever quality of stillness the adults have when they are concentrating on something important, and is now standing with her weight against your leg, looking at the horses with the focused attention that very young people give to things that are large and alive and moving. She does not speak. She watches. And in her watching there is something that will, many thousands of years from now, make someone else not her. But someone carrying something of her in their blood, look at a horse and feel the particular pull of animals that can carry you, can partner with you, can change the way you move through the world. That future is not here yet. Right now the horses are simply horses, magnificent and self-contained, and the group stands on the rise and watches them for long enough that the sun moves perceptibly, and the shadows shift and the light changes from the bright pale of midday toward the warmer, lower angle of afternoon. The steppe bison are also here, though you see them only in the afternoon, a smaller group, perhaps 30 animals, moving with the characteristic rolling walk of bison across the middle distance, their great humped shoulders rocking from side to side with each step. They are enormous, these creatures, larger than the bison you may have seen in illustrations of the American plains, a different subspecies adapted to the cold grasslands of the north, their coats thick and dark and their horns wide and curved in a way that makes each animal look, from the side, like a creature designed by something that had one idea and pursued it to its extreme conclusion. The bison do not notice you or do not consider you interesting enough to respond to. This is the bison's characteristic response to things that are not immediately threatening a kind of imperial indifference, the regal disregard of an animal that has very few natural enemies large enough to worry it seriously. The predators that do take bison tend to work in groups, to use strategy and coordination, and a single, slow-moving group of people on foot is not, in the bison's experience, anything to concern itself with. You watch the bison cross your line of sight and disappear behind a gentle rise, their pace unchanging, their direction purposeful, following some route of their own that probably has nothing to do with your presence and everything to do with the grass and the water and the accumulated memory of bison about where these things are likely to be found in this season. There are also reindeer in Beringia, though you do not see them today. You know they are around from the tracks you have crossed, and from the occasional sound that carries on the wind in the early morning, a hollow clicking sound that comes from tendons in the reindeer's legs, a sound specific to this animal, as unmistakable as any bird call once you have learnt it. The clicking serves as a contact call in dense herds, allowing animals to track each other by sound when sight is obscured by weather or vegetation, and you have come to associate it with a specific quality of early morning cold that makes sound carry further and clearer than at other times of day. The cave lion is something you think about more than you see. You have seen tracks large, round, without claw marks because the claws retract, like a cat's, and press deeply enough into soft ground to suggest an animal of significant weight. You have heard, on 2 nights of this crossing, a sound in the distance that might have been a lion's call, the low resonant grunt that carries across open ground in the darkness, and has the quality of making every other sound stop for a moment in response. The cave lion of Beringia is not small. It is larger than the African lions of the warmer south, larger than almost any cat alive in the modern world will be, and it is a proficient hunter of large prey horses and bison and the occasional young mammoth. It is not particularly interested in people who are small and awkward prey compared to the alternatives, but the landscape it inhabits is the same landscape you are moving through, and so the awareness of it is part of the constant background texture of existence, the same way that the cold and the wind are part of that texture. You have fire. You have the sound and the light of fire, and the large cats of this world have learned, or are in the process of learning, that fire means people, and people, while not dangerous in the way that other large predators are dangerous, are unpredictable in ways that most animals prefer to avoid. The fire will keep the night comfortable and will keep the large things at a respectful distance, and this knowledge lets you sleep, when you sleep, with reasonable peace. But right now it is afternoon, and the sun is still above the horizon, and the horses are in the south, and the bison are gone, over the rise, and somewhere ahead of you, the steppe stretches on toward the eastern land that is drawing closer, with each day's walking, and the quality of the light has that late afternoon richness that makes everything look slightly more real than usual, slightly more itself. You have been watching animals for as long as you can remember, and what strikes you most is not their size or their speed or the particular way the bison move, each animal slightly offset from the one ahead, a pattern that looks almost organized but is not, or not in any way you can articulate it, is the completeness of them. A bison is wholly a bison, a horse is wholly a horse. There is no division in them between what they are and what they do, no gap between the animal and its behavior. They do not worry about being horses. They are horses all the way through, in every movement, every reaction, every relation to the world around them. This completeness is something you carry with you for the rest of the afternoon, not as a thought exactly, but as a quality of attention, a reminder of what it is to be entirely present in a body, entirely committed to the moment that is actually happening. The older man looks at the sky. He looks at the direction the wind is coming from. He looks at the angle of the sun. Then he looks ahead, and there is in his expression something that might be interpreted as the earliest form of satisfaction. Not happiness exactly, not comfort, but the quiet, functional approval of things being roughly as they should be. You keep moving. The animals fade behind you into the landscape. The grass receives each step. The afternoon draws you on. The camp tonight is in the lee of a low ridge, sheltered from the northwest wind by just enough ground to make the difference between a night that is merely cold and a night that is cold in the way that prevents rest. This is the art of camping in open country, reading the topography for the small shelters it offers, the tiny geographical arguments against wind that can, in the right conditions, transform an exposed hillside into something approaching comfort. You have been studying this art since you were old enough to carry a pack, and you have reached the point where the assessment happens almost without deliberate thought, the way the assessment of a river crossing happens quickly, in the first moments of arrival, drawing on everything the body has learned about wind direction and terrain, and the way cold moves through landscape after dark. The woman has already begun the fire, before you have finished assessing the camp. She is the fire maker in this group, not by formal assignment, but by the accumulated logic of competence. She is simply better at it than anyone else. Faster and more reliable, able to read the particular humidity of a given day and adjust her technique accordingly, finding the precise balance of breath and material and angle that produces, in what seems like an impossibly short time, a small bright point of orange in the gathering dusk. Fire-making with the materials available in this time and this place is not the clumsy, laborious process it might appear from the outside. The woman carries what she needs in a carefully maintained kit: a fire bow, a board, a spindle of dry, soft wood, a small nest of fibrous material for catching the first ember. The technique is practiced to the point of muscle memory, the hands knowing what to do even when the mind is elsewhere, and watching her do it is like watching any expert perform a complex skill that has become so integrated that it looks easy, so automatic that it looks simple. It is not simple. It is a technology that took thousands of years to develop, refined through trial and error across more generations than any living person can count, and the knowledge of how to make it work, how to find the right materials, how to prepare them, how to maintain them, how to adapt the technique to different conditions, is as sophisticated as any technology your distant descendants will develop, and in some ways more demanding, because there is no instruction manual, no way to look up what you are doing wrong if it fails. only the accumulated experience of watching and doing, and occasionally, in wet or difficult conditions, failing and trying again. The fire takes. It always takes with her. The small flame grows into a larger flame, and the larger flame finds the arrangement of wood she has prepared for it, and begins to consume it in the steady, reliable way of fire that has been started correctly, and the orange light begins to push back the grey of the evening, and the warmth begins to move outward from the centre of the camp, in an expanding circle that reaches you and settles against your skin like something alive. The children settle close to the fire. This is the most ancient of all arrangements, the circle of people around the fire, the warmth on the faces and the dark at their backs, the particular quality of light that fire gives to faces, which is different from any other quality of light, which makes faces look both more vivid and more interior, as though the fire is illuminating not just the surface of things, but something behind the surface. The food tonight is dried meat from an animal taken several days ago, the careful result of a successful hunt in which the older man's knowledge and your speed combined to produce something that fed the group for 3 days, and that you have been carrying the remainder of in the bundle, thinly cut and dried over a small fire, preserved against the day when hunting is poor and the need is great. It is not hot. It is not fresh, but it is protein and fat and calories, and the body, which has been walking for more hours than it strictly enjoys, receives it with a gratitude that is entirely physical. After eating, there is the particular state that follows a day of significant physical effort, and the consumption of food, and the proximity of warmth, a state that is not quite drowsiness yet, but is in the neighbourhood of drowsiness, in the vicinity of it, close enough to touch. The children have already found this state. The younger one is leaning against the woman's side with the particular boneless quality of a child approaching sleep, and the woman has put her arm around the child without looking, without breaking the quiet attention she is giving to the fire. This is one of the deep rhythms of human life, so deep and so old that calling it ancient does not quite capture it. The circle and the fire, the dark beyond and the warmth within, the end of the day's effort releasing its hold on the muscles and the mind, the gradual unwinding that happens when the body finally has permission to stop. Around this same type of fire, in places distributed across every inhabitable part of the world, other groups of people are doing approximately this same thing, sitting around warmth in the dark, eating what there is to eat, letting the day settle. The specific details are different in every place. Different food, different wood burning, different stars visible through the gap in the clouds, different sounds from the surrounding landscape. But the structure is the same everywhere, because the structure is what it means to be human at this moment in history, and in many moments before and after. The older man does not sleep quickly. He is the one who sits longest by the fire, adding fuel to it in the careful small increments that keep it burning through the night without consuming all the available wood before morning. He watches the darkness beyond the fire's light with the practiced attention of someone who has made himself responsible, through long habit, for the group's safety in the hours when others sleep. He knows what each sound means. He knows the difference between the movement of an animal passing at a distance and the quality of silence that precedes something moving closer. Occasionally he prods the fire. The sparks rise and drift and go dark before they reach the sky. The wind has dropped with the evening, as it often does in this corridor, and the stars are becoming visible above the ridge, in a density that is difficult to imagine in any world with artificial light. Thousands of them, tens of thousands, the full extravagance of a sky that has never once seen a single electric light, brilliant and cold and impossibly various, spread from horizon to horizon in a sweep of faint light that is the galaxy itself, seen edge-on, the arm of the Milky Way stretched across the black. The older man looks at the stars sometimes. He knows them. He has names for the formations that matter, names that carry information about direction and season and the movement of the year, practical names for useful things, but also, sometimes, names that carry something else, a quality of meaning that is harder to specify, that comes from the long habit of looking at something far away and beautiful and trying to find in it some reflection of the life you are living below it. He does not share these thoughts. He sits with them quietly, feeding the fire, listening to the dark, and in his stillness there is something that looks, from the outside, like contentment, not the contentment of someone who has everything they want, but the contentment of someone who has accepted, deeply and finally, the terms of the life they have and found them, on balance, adequate. You are almost asleep. The warmth of the fire is doing what fire warmth always does. It pulls you down, gently, into the layers of rest that the body has been asking for since mid-afternoon. Your thoughts have become the slow, slightly illogical thoughts of the threshold of sleep, the thoughts that do not quite follow each other, that arrive from unexpected directions and lead somewhere new and then dissolve before you reach it. The grass rustles somewhere in the dark. A bird calls once, a short quiet sound, and is silent again. The fire breathes. The stars turn, very slowly, too slowly to see, but turning nonetheless, the slow, reliable turning that has been happening since long before there was anyone to notice it, and will continue happening long after the last person to cross this corridor has carried their descendants so far from here that the memory of this land has become something else entirely. Sleep, now. The night is long and quiet, and the ground beneath you holds you with the same patience it holds the grass and the bones of everything that has ever lived on it, and there is nothing you need to do or watch for or worry about. The older man is awake, the fire is burning, the stars are there. Let the day go. If you are drifting now, let yourself go. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you return. Sleep well. The morning breaks grey and quiet, the kind of morning that arrives without ceremony, the light increasing so gradually that there is no moment you can point to and say there, that is when the night ended. The fire has burned down to coals that still hold heat when you add wood to them, and within minutes there is warmth again and the smell of fire, the oldest smell in the human repertoire, the smell that means something in the body before it means anything in the mind. You are, on this 15th morning of crossing, somewhere that you cannot precisely locate. You know the general direction you have been travelling. You know approximately how far you have come, measured in days of walking and the number of rivers crossed and the sequence of landmarks that the older man has been using to orient himself. But the precise location, the specific spot on the ground, this particular patch of grass, and not any other, that is something that will never be recorded, never be known to anyone but you and the few people moving with you. This is the normal condition of most human lives in most of human history. The vast majority of the people who have ever lived did not leave records. They did not have their movements tracked or their thoughts preserved. They were born and they moved through the world and they died, and almost everything specific about them, the particular quality of their laugh, the things they were afraid of, the places they loved, the routes they walked dissolved into the general, unrecorded past, the way a river drop dissolves into the river it joins. This is not a tragedy, or rather, it is a tragedy only if you apply to the past, the standards of the present, the modern expectation that things should be known and recorded and retrievable. By the standards of the world you are moving through, in which the past is something held in the memory of living people and in the landscape itself and nowhere else. The dissolution of the specific into the general is simply what time does. It is the natural order of things. The grass does not mourn the particular blade that was eaten last season. The river does not note the specific crossing that was made last month. But something does persist. Something carries forward, even when the specific is lost. The route you are walking, the general eastward direction, the logic of following the grass and the animals, the decision to cross through this corridor rather than another, will be repeated by others, and the fact of the crossing, the fact that people went this way, will eventually be visible in the genetic record, in the distribution of language families, in the archaeology of the distant lands to the east, where your descendants will build their own fires and learn their own landscapes and, in time, leave their own record in the rock and soil of places no one from here has ever been. You walk through the morning in a quiet that is the quiet of established rhythm. The group has settled into a pace that everyone knows and no one needs to negotiate, a pace calibrated to the slowest member's comfortable speed without being so slow as to feel like a compromise. The children have been doing this long enough that they no longer need to be reminded to stay close or to tell someone when they need to rest. They have internalized the discipline of travel the way children internalize anything they are immersed in early enough thoroughly, and without realizing they are doing it. Around mid-morning, you find a place where someone stopped before you. Not recently the hearth is old, the ash long since scattered by weather, the charred stones arranged in the particular low circle that is the obvious way to arrange stones for a fire, but that also, when you see it, carries unmistakably the mark of a deliberate human hand. The stones have been moved to this arrangement. No natural process arranged them this way. You crouch and put your hand near the old ash. No warmth. You look at the stones. Some of them have been fire-cracked, split by the thermal shock of repeated heating and cooling, which means the fire was built here more than once. This was not a single stopping place, but a campsite, a place used and returned to, which means someone knew where it was, came back to it, found it reliable enough to use again. How long ago? Impossible to say with any precision. The stones do not tell you that. But the scatter of small flint flakes a few meters away from the hearth tells you something someone made or repaired tools here sitting by the fire, working stone with a particular careful percussion technique that produces these flakes as a byproduct. You pick up one of the flakes and feel its edge, the sharpness of freshly knapped flint, still present after however long it has been lying here. The older man is examining the flakes more closely. He picks up several, holds them to the light, considers the angle of the striking platform, the thickness of the flake, the type of stone. He sets them down. He looks at the hearth. He stands and looks around at the landscape from this spot, reading whatever it is that made someone, some specific person, now unknowable, choose this place to stop rather than one of the many other places available. There is shelter here, slight but real, a low outcropping of stone to the northwest that would cut the worst of the winter wind. There is water nearby, you can hear it, and the vegetation to the northeast has the particular density that indicates a seep or small spring. The ground is high enough to have good visibility in most directions, which matters for safety. Whoever stopped here knew what they were doing. Whoever stopped here had travelled this ground before, or been told about it, or figured it out from first principles in the same way you are reading it now. You leave the old camp as you found it, not because of any formal rule, but because of the instinct that says, this might be useful to someone else. The arrangement of the stones, the presence of the old ash, the message that says someone was here and found this good, these are information, the most durable kind of information available in a world without writing, the information embedded in the landscape itself by the actions of people who did not know they were leaving information. This is the language of stone and ash, the oldest form of human communication, predating speech in its written form by hundreds of thousands of years. The conversation that happens between people who never meet, across gaps of time that are too large to grasp, through the simple fact of actions taken and traces left and later found. The afternoon brings wind from the northwest, harder than the morning's breeze, and the sky above has taken on the particular texture of cloud cover that you have learned to associate with weather changing, the individual clouds losing their definition and merging into a single grey ceiling that lowers over the course of hours until it feels like it is resting on the tops of the ridge to the north. You find another campsite before the weather closes in completely. Not as comfortable as the one from last night, not as sheltered, but adequate a depression in the ground large enough for the group to lie in, with a sufficient windbreak on the northwest side, and enough scraggly willow growing nearby to provide fuel. You will not have a large fire tonight, but you will have fire. The rain, when it comes, is fine and cold, and the kind that wets you slowly rather than quickly, the gradual seeping kind that finds its way through layers of clothing without the drama of a downpour. You arrange what shelter you can, the oiled skins spread and propped, the group huddled beneath them in the specific warmth of bodies close together, the fire small but present under its own small shelter of layered bark. The children sleep almost immediately. The woman stays awake for a while, listening, doing the inventory of the group's condition that she does at the end of every difficult day, everyone accounted for, everyone warm enough, everything as secure as it can be made in the circumstances. When she is satisfied, she sleeps too. The rain falls on the grass, and the grass bends under it and springs back when it passes and bends again with the next shower. The rain falls on the old stones of the ancient hearth you found this morning, and the rain falls on the bones of the mammoths that walked through here last month, and the rain falls on the sea that is somewhere to the north and somewhere to the south, and that is even now, receiving the meltwater from the glaciers that are slowly returning the ocean to what it will be when this corridor is gone. Let the rain be your company. Let the sound of it on the skin above you be the last sound you follow down into the quiet. Watch the older girl for a while. She is not doing anything remarkable. She is walking, the same walking she has been doing for 15 days, and she is carrying a small bundle of her own, not as heavy as the adults carry, but real, containing the things she has been entrusted with. Some fire-starting materials, a small pointed tool made from antler, a folded piece of dried plant fiber that she uses for binding. She has been trusted with these things in the way that children are trusted with real responsibilities when there is no practical alternative, and she has carried them without losing or damaging any of them, which has passed without comment because it was expected. She is walking and she is looking. This is the most characteristic thing about her, the quality of her attention, which is not the unfocused, roving attention of a bored child, but the particular directed attention of someone who is genuinely interested in the world around her. She looks at things, not just at the obvious large things, the animals, the weather, but at the ground in front of her feet, at the specific plants growing in specific microhabitats, at the quality of the light through a break in the clouds, at the way a particular bird behaves in a way that is slightly different from how she expected it to behave. She is not yet 10 years old. She has never had a formal lesson. She cannot read or write in any language that will ever exist, but she is becoming, at a rate that would astonish anyone who failed to pay attention to the process, a person who knows things, a person building, from direct experience and close observation, a model of the world that is detailed and accurate and useful. In 10,000 years, the descendants of this girl will be numerous and various, scattered across 2 continents, speaking hundreds of languages, building complex civilizations that will be discovered and destroyed and rebuilt and transformed beyond recognition. Some of them will be the ancestors of the great civilizations of Mesoamerica, the Maya, who will record astronomical observations more precise than anything achievable in Europe for another 1,000 years. Some will be the ancestors of the Lakota, who will develop a culture of such sophisticated relationship with the bison that the near extinction of the bison will be experienced as a kind of personal death. Some will be the ancestors of the Inuit, who will learn to live in conditions so extreme that it will take the rest of the world thousands of years to even begin to understand how they do it. All of those people, all of those cultures, all of that accumulated human possibility is somewhere in this girl, not yet realized, not yet differentiated, just present, the way. All of the ways a river can flow is present in the headwaters before the land has organized it into channels. She stops. She has found something in the grass, something small, and she crouches and picks it up and holds it to the light. From where you are, you cannot see what it is, a stone, perhaps, or a bone fragment, or some plant material that has caught her attention. Whatever it is, she examines it for a long moment with the focused interest that is her characteristic response to the world, and then she makes a decision. She puts it in her bundle rather than putting it back on the ground. She has assessed it as worth keeping, for reasons that are her own. What is it like to be her? To be 9 years old and crossing a land bridge that will disappear in 3,000 years, carrying a small bundle of real responsibilities, building a map of a world that no one will ever be able to fully reconstruct. To be doing this in the ordinary way, as the ordinary condition of your life, without drama, without the sense of historical moment that observers thousands of years later will want to impose on what you are doing, she does not know she is making history. She is making lunch, in the sense that she is looking for the edible plants she has learned to identify, checking the stems and leaves of the things she passes against the patterns stored in her memory. She is making shelter, in the sense that she is constantly assessing the terrain for places that might make good camps if they need to stop before reaching the older man's intended destination. She is making herself, in the most fundamental sense, in the way that all children make themselves, by moving through the world and taking from it the experiences that become the structure of who they are. The younger child is different. Where his sister looks and analyzes, he feels. He responds to the world more immediately, more physically, more emotionally. He is the one who cried when you crossed the wide river 2 days ago and the cold water reached his chest. And he is also the one who, an hour after the crossing, was laughing at something his sister showed him in the grass. The negative emotions not suppressed but genuinely discharged, replaced by something else without the brooding aftermath that adults sometimes carry. He is 5 or 6 years old enough to walk the full distance of each day's journey when the terrain is reasonable, young enough to be carried for short stretches when it is not. What he is learning is different from what his sister is learning, not only because he is younger, but because he is differently inclined, and both are necessary. A group needs people who remember how to get from here to there, and people who notice when someone in the group is suffering and needs attention. It needs the builders of models and the maintainers of relationships. It needs both the girl who puts things in her bundle and the boy who cries at cold water. The two of them will grow up and find partners and have children, and those children will grow up on the eastern side of this corridor, in land their parents first saw as children crossing Beringia, and those grandchildren will know that land as home. They will know its rivers and its animals and its seasons and its silences. They will build their fires in that land and bury their dead in that land, and tell their children stories about where they came from. And in those stories, across the generations, the specific geography of this crossing will become something else. A story about a great migration, a time before, a first world. The details will shift. The grass will become sea, or the sea will become a sky bridge, or the crossing will be made by raven or by whale or by the first humans descending from a higher world. The story will take the shape of each new culture that holds it, the way water takes the shape of each new vessel it is poured into without ceasing to be water. But the fact of the crossing will persist. The fact that there was a before and an after, a place of origin and a new world, a journey across something that was neither here nor there, that fact will survive in the stories for thousands of years, long after the corridor itself is gone. The older girl is walking again. She has put the thing from the grass in her bundle, and her attention has moved on to the next thing, the next grass, the next sky. She is efficient with her attention in the way that you become efficient with any resource when there is a lot to do and only so much capacity to do it. She does not know she is carrying the future. She knows she is carrying a small bundle and that there is still several hours of walking before camp, and that the clouds to the northwest look like they might bring more rain, and that she is hungry in the comfortable background way of someone who has been walking all day and whose body is doing what it needs to do. The boy beside her is less patient. He has been walking for 17 days, and he is tired in the deep-down way that children get tired when they have used everything they have for too long, and what comes out of that tiredness is not sleep, but a kind of vivid, slightly ragged alertness, a hyper-awareness of small things, a beetle on a stem, a cloud with an interesting shape, the texture of a piece of dried grass. He picks up and runs through his fingers as he walks. He will remember this afternoon, or something of it. Not the walking. The beetle, maybe. The cloud. The way the grass smelled. This is enough. This is more than enough. This is the whole world. Keep walking. The afternoon is long and the children are walking, and the grass is bending in the wind, and everything is exactly as it needs to be. If you are drifting now, let yourself go. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you return. Sleep well. On the 17th morning, you wake before the others, and the first thing you see, in the grey-blue pre-dawn light, is a mammoth. It is standing perhaps 60 meters from camp, on the gentle slope above you, and it is completely still. This is unusual. Mammoths are not usually still, because eating takes most of their waking hours, and their waking hours are most of their hours. But this one is not eating. It is standing with its head raised and its ears out. The ears of a mammoth are relatively small for an animal so large, but in this posture they are held slightly forward, and this, combined with the absolute stillness of the body, has the quality of an animal that is paying attention to something you cannot identify. You do not move. This is the first instinct, and it is correct not from fear exactly, because a single mammoth in open country that is not a cow with a calf is unlikely to charge a small group of sleeping humans, but from the older instinct not to disturb something in the act of attending, not to interrupt the particular focused moment that precedes a decision. The mammoth is extraordinary. You have seen mammoths before, many times, but there is something about this morning, this specific quality of early light, that makes colour muted and form simplified, that makes this animal look more itself than any animal you have ever seen. It is enormous in a way that the word enormous does not adequately describe a weight and mass and presence that you feel before you fully see it, the way you feel a storm before it arrives, a gathering of something in the air. Its coat is the particular russet brown of autumn grass, the same colour as the landscape it stands in, so that in poor light it would be easy to mistake for a fold in the ground, a rounded hill, a feature of the terrain rather than an animal. This is not accident. Not in the evolutionary sense. The coat colour of the woolly mammoth is optimised for this landscape, this grass, this quality of northern light. evolved over hundreds of thousands of years of being this color in this place. The tusks curve forward and slightly upward in the characteristic spiral of a mature male, long enough and curved enough that they are unmistakably not tools but something else, something closer to ornament in the functional sense, the visible marker of age and genetic quality that other mammoths read the way you might read a face, learning from it everything relevant about the animal behind it. These tusks are probably 5 or 6 meters long, maybe more. They have been growing for as long as this animal has been alive, which is probably 40 years or more, a lifespan not unlike your own. The mammoth turns its head. Not toward you, it has almost certainly known you were there since before you woke, because its sense of smell is extraordinary, and the smell of people and fire carries far in the still morning air, but towards something to the north, some sound or smell in that direction that has redirected its attention. And in turning its head, it shows you its profile against the pale sky, the enormous dome of the skull, the long hump of muscle over the shoulders that powers the enormous head, and the lifelong work of the tusks, and behind it the long arc of the back and the heavy hindquarters, and the tail, small and straight, and then the enormous legs, the front legs especially, which you can see are sinking slightly into the soft ground with each small shift of weight. It makes a sound, not a trumpet, not the loud, dramatic sound that you associate with alarmed or excited elephants. A lower sound, a rumbling that seems to come from somewhere in the chest rather than the throat, a sound that you feel more than hear, that moves through the ground and through your bones and that carries, in its texture, everything about an animal that has been alive for 40 years in this specific landscape. Another mammoth answers. It is further away, perhaps 100 meters to the northeast, invisible in the tall grass, but its answer is unmistakable, the same low rumble, at a different pitch, carrying information you cannot interpret, but that the mammoth beside you clearly can, because after a moment it begins to move, slowly and deliberately, in the direction of the sound. Each step places the massive foot precisely, the toes spreading slightly as the weight comes down, the great body rocking gently from side to side in the particular rolling gait of elephants and their relatives, a gait that looks slow from the outside but covers ground faster than you might expect. It is moving away from you. Within 2 minutes, it has crested the slight rise to the north and is gone, and the landscape where it stood is empty of everything except grass and the pressed down places where the great feet were. You did not breathe very much during this. You notice that now the slight compression in your chest that comes from unconscious breath holding, the slow release as the animal disappears. You breathe in, and the air smells of mammoth, a warm animal smell with something musky beneath it that is specific to this species, that you have learned over a lifetime to associate with all the things that mammoths mean: food, sometimes, material, sometimes, danger, occasionally, and beneath all of those practical associations, something else that is harder to name, the particular feeling that comes from proximity to something very large and very alive that has been on this earth much longer than you have. The older man is awake. He has been awake for a while. You think there is nothing in his expression that suggests he has just been woken by anything. He was watching. He watched the mammoth, and he watched you watching the mammoth, and now he watches you collect yourself and settle back against the pack you were sleeping against. And there is in his expression something that is the nearest thing he ever comes to affection. Not the demonstrative warmth of the younger adults in the group, but the quieter thing, the acknowledgement of a shared experience that needed no words. You think about what you just saw for a long time, in the way that the mind returns to significant experiences and turns them, looking at them from different angles, pressing on the details to see what holds. The mammoth's size, the particular sound of the rumble, the way it moved. The fact that somewhere to the north, another mammoth answered, and the conversation that passed between them, in infrasound too low for human ears to pass, contained information about the world as two animals 40 years old understood it. What did they say to each other? You will never know. The language of mammoths is, in 10,000 years, a language that no one will ever speak again, because the mammoths will be gone and their language will go with them, the way all languages go with the last speaker, completely and irrecoverably. Think of all that is carried in a language. Not just the words for things, but the way things are related to each other, the grammar of how a mammoth understands distance and direction, the particular vocabulary of danger and food and family, the specific sounds that mean, I am here, and the sounds that mean come closer, and the sounds that mean something is wrong in the north. All of this has been refined over hundreds of thousands of years, passed from mother to calf, adjusted and elaborated across more generations than you can count, and it will end. Not today, not soon in any human timescale, but it will end, the last mammoth will die without passing anything on, and all of that accumulated understanding of how to be a mammoth in this world will simply cease. But this morning, in this pre-dawn grey-blue light, the language is alive. There are mammoths saying things to other mammoths across this corridor, saying things they have been saying for as long as mammoths have been here, which is longer than you can count in any system of numbers available to you. The thought of what is lost when a species ends does not come to you in these terms. You have no framework for extinction as a concept, no word for a thing that has ceased to exist because its last member has died. What you have is a different, perhaps more intimate understanding, that individual animals are irreplaceable, that the old male you just watched is unlike every other mammoth you have ever seen, because he specifically has 40 years of accumulated experience in this landscape, because he knows things about this place that no other animal knows in quite the same way. When he dies, whatever he knew about this particular corner of Beringia, the good water in the Third Valley North, the dangerous soft ground near the coastal bluffs, the direction the herds move in the worst winters, that knowledge dies with him. This is true of every animal. It is true of every person. It is the fundamental fact of individual existence that what you have learned, in the specific school of your specific life, is yours alone and will not survive you exactly. The morning brightens. The fire is rebuilt. The woman distributes what there is to eat. The children wake and are briefly confused in the morning way of children, and then remember where they are and what the day requires. The mammoth does not come back. But it was here. That is not nothing. It was here, and you were here, and the morning held both of you briefly in the same grey light, and that is something that happens and then is over and is gone, and is also, somehow, permanent, the way everything that ever actually happens is permanent, because it actually happened, because it is part of the fixed and unalterable record of what occurred in this universe on this particular morning. The group assembles, the packs go on, the walking begins. You carry the mammoth with you into the day. On the 19th day, the land changes, not dramatically, not in the way of a border or a wall or a clear line drawn across the earth, but gradually, subtly, in the way that landscapes transition when you are paying close attention, you begin to notice that something is different. The grass is slightly different, the same grasses, mostly, but in slightly different proportions, with more of the taller sedges and fewer of the shorter upland species. The topography has changed too, a bit more rolling, a bit more relief, the gentle rises and dips that you have been navigating becoming slightly more pronounced, as though the land is beginning to assert itself more firmly against the flatness that characterized the middle of the corridor. The older man is moving differently. His pace has not changed, but the quality of his attention has shifted. He is looking around more, checking landmarks, doing the internal assessment that travelers do when they are approaching something they expected and want to confirm that the approach is going as anticipated. Occasionally he stops for longer than usual and looks in a specific direction, not the casting around look of someone assessing weather or terrain, but the look of someone measuring distance, comparing what they see with what they remember. On the 20th morning you climb a long, gentle rise, and from its crest you see water. Not a river, not a lake. The sea, or something very close to it, a wide, shining expanse that stretches from left to right across your view, pale grey and reflecting the overcast sky, moving slightly in the way that large bodies of water move, not in waves exactly at this distance, but in a faint collective motion, a shimmer as though the surface is breathing. You stand and look at it for a long time. The children come up beside you and look. The younger one makes a sound, not a word, just a vocalization, the sound of confronting something so large that it exceeds the ordinary categories. The older girl stands quietly and studies the water with the same methodical attention she gives everything, as though she is building a model of it that will be useful later. This is the eastern shore of Beringia, or close to it. The corridor does not end here in any sharp geographic sense. The land continues east and south, gradually becoming what will eventually be called Alaska, and then the Yukon, and then the vast interior of North America. But this is the edge of the specific terrain you have been crossing, the place where Beringia proper gives way to something else, something continuous with the great eastern continent, and standing on the rise looking at the water, you feel in your body the particular satisfaction of having crossed something. The woman is standing beside you. She does not say anything, but she puts her hand briefly on your arm, and in that gesture is everything that does not need to be said. The acknowledgement of the effort, the shared quality of the arrival, the specific weight of having done something together that neither of you could have done alone. Then she looks back at the water, and you look with her, and for a while you both just look, which is the correct response to arriving at the edge of something vast. The water is cold. You know this without touching it, from the way the light falls on it and the temperature of the air coming off it and the particular smell that cold marine water has, a clean mineral smell, the smell of the deepest cold in the world rising through miles of water and reaching you as just a freshness, a quality of the air. This is the Pacific Ocean, or the forerunner of it, the arm of it that reaches up into these latitudes, and it is enormous, beyond the imagination of anyone who has not stood at its edge. There is a particular quality to standing at the edge of something that you have been walking toward. The arrival is different from what the approach predicted. You have been carrying an idea of this moment, not a detailed picture, not something you could describe if asked, but a felt sense of what it would be like to reach this place, to stand here and look at this water. The reality of it is larger and simpler than the idea was. The idea of a coast is something you could hold in your mind. The actual coast, with its cold smell and its vast grey light, and the sound that comes off it, is something that requires your whole body to receive. People live on this coast. Or people have lived on this coast, and people will. The coast is one of the most productive environments in the world for the kind of hunting and gathering that sustains a human life in the northern latitudes, rich in sea mammals and fish and shellfish, and the birds that congregate around rich water. You are not the first people to have looked at this water. You are somewhere in a long, continuous stream of people looking at this water, from the people who first arrived here thousands of years before you, to the people who are already here, living on this coast, who you may or may not encounter in the days and weeks ahead. The thought of other people ahead gives you a particular feeling that is partly anticipation, and partly caution, and partly something else. Something harder to name, the feeling of approaching a world that already has its own arrangements, its own established ways of doing things, its own relationships and territories and knowledge of this specific place. You are not arriving in an empty world. You are arriving in someone else's world, or in a world that is in the process of becoming someone else's world, and the nature of that encounter, when it happens, is something you cannot predict. This is also the history of Beringia. People did not cross the corridor into emptiness. They crossed into a world that was already becoming occupied, that had been occupied in some areas for longer than others, and the relationships between the earlier arrivals and the later ones, between the people who were already here and the people who kept coming, it were various and complex, and often difficult in the way that all encounters between strangers are difficult, when resources are limited and trust has not been established. But also often, in the long aggregate of things productive, groups merged. Knowledge was shared. People who knew the coast taught people who knew the interior. People who knew how to hunt mammoths taught people who knew how to process the sea. Children were born to parents from different groups and carried in their bodies the combination of two ways of knowing the world. This is also part of what the crossing of Beringia means in the long story. Not just the arrival of a new group on a new continent, but the beginning of a long series of encounters and combinations and conflicts and syntheses that will, over 10,000 years, produce the extraordinary diversity of cultures and languages and ways of being human that will characterize the Americas. At the moment the second great crossing happens, the crossing of the Atlantic, thousands of years from now, by people who will also think they are arriving somewhere new. But that is later. That is someone else's morning. Right now the water is there, the sky is there. The grass behind you bends in the wind coming off the sea, and the smell of the water is in the air, and the children are looking at the horizon with the particular focused attention of children who are seeing something for the first time and know they are seeing it for the first time and want to get it right. There is a place to camp below the rise, sheltered by a bank of earth and a stand of stunted willows. You have been here before, or someone like you has. There is the faint impression in the ground of old occupation, the trace of a cleared area that has since grown over, but not quite grown back to the randomness of untouched earth. You make your way down. The ground levels out and the grass thickens and the sea is no longer visible, only present in the smell and the sound, a low sound, very low, almost below hearing, the sound of water moving against the edge of a continent that is not quite prepared to yield. The fire tonight will burn smaller, because the wood is scarcer near the coast, but it will burn long enough. The children will sleep with the sound of the sea they cannot see. The older man will sit by the coals and look at the stars and know where he is, finally, with the particular precision of someone who has been navigating toward a specific place and has arrived at it. You are almost where you are going. Not quite there are still days ahead, decisions to make, a direction to choose among several possible directions. But the sense of arrival is there, in the quality of the evening, in the way everyone moves through the camp, with the slightly lighter quality of people who have been carrying a destination inside them for a long time, and can now, for the first time, set it down. The sea says something in its low voice, too slow and low to be words, but full of the quality of something with a great deal to tell. Listen, the night is almost here. On the 22nd day, you meet them. The encounter happens at mid-morning, at the edge of a shallow lake that sits in a depression in the coastal plain, a lake surrounded by reed beds and low willows that screen the view on three sides. You come around the eastern edge of the reeds and they are there, a group of 5 or 6 people, similarly equipped to your own group, similarly bundled against the cold, similarly intent on what they were doing before you appeared, which was something involving a net and the still water at the lake's edge. Everyone stops. This is the universal human response to the sudden appearance of strangers in a landscape where strangers are rare. A stillness, a complete pause in activity, while both groups assess the situation in whatever time is available. The assessment is rapid, because the window in which assessment and decision are needed simultaneously is always brief. What is assessed? Size of the other group, posture aggressive or neutral, weapons visible or not, children present or not. And, underneath all of these specific assessments, something more general and less articulable. The overall quality of the encounter, the felt sense of whether this is danger or possibility or some mixture of both. You have your hand at your side, not on your tools but not away from them. The older man is slightly ahead of you, and he is the one who speaks first, not words exactly, because you cannot be certain they share your language, but sounds, a specific combination of sounds that carries the quality of greeting in the way that certain prosodic shapes carry the quality of greeting across language, families, the rising then falling tone that means I am here and I am not hostile, in the way that such things mean what they mean beneath the level of specific vocabulary. A man from the other group answers, not with the same sounds, but with sounds that have the same shape, the same quality, and in the quality of the response is everything you need to know about the nature of this meeting, which is that it is a meeting, not a confrontation, that these people have encountered strangers before and have ways of managing the encounter, that there is, in the long social history of this corridor, an understanding of how to do this. What follows is slow and careful, conducted partly in sound and partly in gesture and partly in the language of objects, things shown, things offered, the careful presentations that people make when they want to establish that they are there in good faith and that the good faith is legible. The woman from their group comes forward slightly, and the woman from your group mirrors the movement, and something passes between them, an assessment, an acknowledgement, the particular communication of 2 people doing the same work in the world, looking at each other and recognizing the sameness. Children from both groups edge toward each other, with the specific curiosity of children who are being slightly more cautious than they want to be. The younger boy from your group, always the more sociable of the 2, looks at a child from the other group, a girl, slightly larger than him, with the bright, transparent interest of a child who has been the younger sibling for his entire life and is accustomed to following other people's leads. The other child looks back with an assessment of her own. They have fish. This is what the net was for. They have been pulling fish from the shallow water, a species of small fish that congregates in the weedy shallows in this season, and they have a significant pile of them laid out on the grass. They are people of the coast, or at least people who know the coast well enough to fish it. And they are doing it with the efficiency of people whose ancestors have been doing it for a long time in this specific place. You have dried mammoth meat. Not much of it, but some. The exchange, when it happens, is not calculated. It does not feel transactional in the way of a market. It feels more like the sharing that happens between people who are both demonstrating that they can afford to be generous. which is itself a form of information about the quality of the resource base available to each group. Watch how the exchange happens. The small pause before anything is offered. The way the first offering is made in a quantity that is clearly less than everything available. The way it is received with a gesture that acknowledges both the gift and the giver. This is protocol, not arbitrary formality, but a system refined across thousands of encounters between groups of people who might be allies or might be rivals, and who need a way of discovering which, without any certainty about the proof, answer before it is revealed. The protocol creates a space in which discovery can happen safely. You are grateful for it now, because without it, an encounter like this one is simply two groups of people staring at each other across a distance too narrow for comfort and too wide for conversation. You spend part of the afternoon near this other group without quite joining them. The older man talks with a man from the other group in a mixture of shared words and invented conventions for the words they do not share, and something of real informational content passes between them. You can tell from the way the older man listens and responds, the way his posture changes when he learns something, the slight forward lean that means he is receiving information he considers important. What he learns, as best you can reconstruct from the conversation you observe, is something about the country to the south and east, the direction you are intending to go. There is a river, a large one, several days in that direction. There is a mountain range beyond it which is passable but requires attention to the season, because the pass is close in winter and it is already late in the season. There are people further east and south, more people than in the corridor you have been crossing, people who have been living in that land long enough to know it very well, and who may or may not welcome new arrivals depending on circumstances that are impossible to predict from here. The older man receives all of this with the particular absorption of someone adding new information to an already complex model, integrating it, checking it against what he already knows, finding the places where it confirms and the places where it contradicts. After a while, he nods. The gesture means the same thing in most human languages, and in this context it means I understand, and also I am grateful. The groups separate in the late afternoon, not because anyone decides it is time, but because the logic of camping before dark requires it, and each group has its own preferred direction for the night. There is a final exchange. Small things, a piece of prepared hide from them, some dried plant material from you, gifts that are mostly symbolic, the symbols carrying the message that these people are part of the network, that they will be remembered and treated well if encountered again. The older girl from your group watches the other group's departure. With the focused attention she gives everything significant. She is memorizing them, or something about them, the specific details of their tools, their clothing, the way they moved. She is adding them to the model, the internal encyclopedia of the world that she has been building for as long as she has been paying attention to the world, which is as long as she has been alive. She will remember this encounter. Not forever, she will forget the specific details, the way you forget the details of most experiences, with the general pattern remaining after the specifics have faded. But the pattern will stay, that other people exist in this world, that they can be approached carefully and treated honestly, that meeting them can be the occasion for learning things that could not be learned any other way. This is how knowledge has always moved in the world. Not just through inheritance, not just from parent to child, but sideways, between strangers, across the gaps between groups, carried in the exchanges of people who encounter each other in places like this, at the edge of a shallow lake in a corridor of land that is slowly being reclaimed by the sea. Consider what this afternoon represents in the longer story of human beings on this continent. These people, the coastal group with their nets and their fish, and their knowledge of the currents and the tides, they carry information that your inland group does not have, and your group carries information that they do not have. The geography of what each group knows is as specific and shaped as the geography of the land itself. And in the afternoon's conversation, some of that knowledge crossed the boundary between groups, moved from one set of minds to another, was added to the map that each group carries of how the world is and what it offers. This is the great invisible technology of human beings. Not the tools, not the weapons, not the fire, but the ability to share knowledge across the boundary of the individual and the group. A mammoth's knowledge dies with the mammoth. A wolf's knowledge of the territory dies with the wolf. But a person's knowledge can be given away, can be offered, in a mixture of words and gestures, to someone who will use it and remember it, and perhaps pass it on to someone else who will need it. The afternoon is cooling. The other group is now fully out of sight beyond the reed beds. What remains of their presence is the pile of small fish, carefully wrapped and added to your bundle, and the piece of prepared hide that the older man holds and examines with the appreciation of someone recognizing skilled work. The scraping is finer than anything your group does, reflecting long practice with this specific material in this specific way. The other group has disappeared into the reeds. The lake is quiet again, reflecting the late sky. The fish they left behind have been carefully wrapped and added to the bundle. You have what you need for now. The evening is coming gently from the east, the direction you are heading, and the stars will come with it, and the older man will look at them and confirm what he already knew about where you are and what comes next. The reed beds make a sound in the evening wind, a dry, papery, collective sound, 1,000 stems rubbing against each other in the particular rhythm of wind through reeds, which is one of the oldest sounds in the world, unchanged from before there were ears to hear it. Let it be the last sound of this day. Let it carry you quietly down. Consider the water for a moment. The water that is coming is not sudden. It does not arrive one morning and take the land in a rush of catastrophic flooding. It comes the way most of the truly large changes come slowly, incrementally, at a pace that no individual human lifetime is long enough to witness in full, spread across so many generations that the change is the background and not the event. In the 3,000 years after you complete your crossing, here is what happens to the ground you walked on. The glaciers continue to melt. They have been melting since the glacial maximum, and they will continue melting for several thousand years, adding water to the oceans in the way that happens when an enormous amount of water that was in solid form becomes liquid form and flows downhill to the sea. The sea rises. Not quickly, perhaps a meter per century in the worst periods, sometimes less, sometimes more depending on the pace of warming and the specific timing of ice sheet collapses in Greenland and Antarctica. As the sea rises, the lowest parts of Beringia go first. The broadest, flattest central sections, the areas that are, in your time, barely above sea level, begin to flood from the north and south simultaneously, as the Arctic Ocean to the north and the Pacific to the south advance toward each other across the plain. For hundreds of years, the flooding is seasonal, the lowest ground going under in wet years and re-emerging in dry ones, giving the land a character of uncertainty, of not quite being one thing or the other. Then the flooding becomes permanent. The central section goes under first, then the northern sections, then the southern, the process taking perhaps 1,000 years from first flooding to completion, and during that 1,000 years, the corridor narrows from its maximum width of 1,000 kilometers to a strip, then to a tidal flat, then to nothing. The last high ground persists as islands. For a while, the Pribilof Islands and St. Lawrence Island and St. Matthew Island are, in some sense, the last peaks of Beringia, still visible above the water, their slopes now the sites of enormous seabird colonies and seal haul-outs, their ground still bearing the traces, buried under meters of peat, of the grassland that preceded them. The sea closes over the rest. The grasses are buried under sediment. The river channels become submarine valleys, still visible in the bathymetry of the modern seafloor, if you know where to look. The mammoth bones, the bison bones, the horse bones and the reindeer bones settle into the mud and are slowly covered and are preserved, improbably well, by the cold and the anoxia of the seafloor, waiting for a far future time when fishing trawlers will pull them up in their nets, or when paleontologists will take sediment cores and find ancient pollen and construct, from this accumulated evidence, a picture of a world that everyone else had forgotten. The hearth where someone made fire before you found it, the one with the split stones and the flint flakes, is now under 60 meters of the Bering Sea. It is sitting exactly where it was, in the slight depression in the ground, the stones still in their arrangement, the flint flakes still scattered around it in the pattern left by the person who napped them. No one will ever excavate it. No one will ever know which particular person lit a fire there, or what season it was, or how long they stayed. But the flint is still there. The stones are still arranged. Whatever happened around that fire is still, in some physical sense, present embedded in the material record of the world, inaccessible and eternal and real. The people who crossed with you, and the people who crossed before, and the people who crossed after their bones, are also in the ground, in the cases where they were buried, and their descendants are in every corner of 2 continents, in numbers that are eventually counted in the tens of millions, living in environments so varied that it takes a moment to remember that all of them trace their ancestry to people who walk through the same grass you walk through. The languages they speak are as various as the environments they live in. There are languages spoken in the Amazon basin that are entirely unrelated to languages spoken in the Arctic, which are unrelated to the languages of the Pacific coast, which are unrelated to the languages of the Great Plains. The diversity of American indigenous languages, the sheer number of distinct language families and isolated languages suggests that the people who crossed Beringia spread so fast and so completely that the linguistic diversity of two continents accumulated over thousands of years of separation, of distinct populations developing in distinct environments without contact with each other. Among these languages, there are stories. There are always stories in every human culture, because stories are one of the primary ways that humans make sense of the world and transmit that sense to the next generation. And in some of these stories, spread across languages and cultures that have no other obvious connection, there are themes that might be echoes of something very old, something from the time of the crossing or even earlier. Flood stories. The stories of a great flood that swallowed land that once existed, land where ancestors lived, land that is now beneath the sea. In the distant future, when climate change becomes a crisis that forces the re-examination of ancient knowledge, researchers will note that indigenous communities along the coasts of many parts of the world have stories that seem to encode the memory of sea level rise at the end of the last glacial maximum, stories that describe land features now underwater, with enough accuracy to suggest they were passed down from people who actually saw those features before the sea took them. This is extraordinary, if true. It would mean that human memory, transmitted through story across dozens of generations, preserved geographic information about a world that changed 6,000 years ago, which would make these stories among the oldest accurate geographic information maintained by any human culture. It would mean that the people who crossed Beringia and watched its coast slowly flood and its last high ground become islands carried that knowledge with them, transformed into story, and passed it to their children, who passed it to theirs, and the knowledge survived even as everything specific about the people who first held it was lost. The ground under the sea does not know any of this. The bones and the hearthstones and the flint flakes are just where they are, doing nothing, being nothing except themselves, waiting in the cold, dark water for whatever comes next. But the people who made them are everywhere. They are the faces in the mirror. They are the languages spoken in places a story cannot describe. They are the grandchildren of the girl who put something in her bundle, and the great-grandchildren of the older man who read the stars, and the 10 times great-grandchildren of the children who grew up to have children, who grew up to have children, who eventually built cities of stone, and developed writing, and looked at the sky and named the stars in languages that had no word for Beringia, which was, by then, deep under the sea. The crossing happened. The crossing is over. The corridor is gone. But the people are here, and the story is here, and you are here, breathing in the dark, on the other side of your own journey, which is what every night is a crossing, a passage from one state to another, a brief suspension in the corridor between waking and sleep. The grass bends, the wind passes, the water rises, slowly over thousands of years, over the place where you stood, and yet something of you persists, the way everything that has ever happened persists in the world that came after it, shaped, however invisibly, by the fact that it happened. Rest now. The water is rising, but not here, not yet, not for 3,000 years. And in 3,000 years, the people who came from you will be far away, living in land so various and so beautiful that the word beautiful is inadequate, having learned from the land everything the land knows how to teach, which is more than can be said in any language. For now, the grass is here, the fire is here, the stars are here, you are here. That is enough. That is more than enough. The sky at night over Beringia is something you need to try to imagine, because it is something that very few people alive today have seen anything equivalent to. No city lights, no highways, no distant glow of settlements visible on the horizon in any direction. Not a single artificial light anywhere on the surface of the earth, because artificial light does not exist yet, because human life in this period is lived entirely by the light of fires and the sun and the moon and the stars, which means that the dark is real dark, the kind of dark that takes getting used to, and that, once your eyes have adjusted to it, reveals a sky of such staggering complexity that it looks almost more than the sky, more than a ceiling, more than an absence of ground, more like a statement about the scale of things. The stars over Beringia on a clear night in this period number in the thousands, maybe the tens of thousands, visible to the naked eye in a way that is physically different from what most humans in the modern world can perceive. The Milky Way is not a faint suggestion, a pale smear that might be clouds. It is a structure, a visible architecture, a band of light with internal texture, with brighter and darker regions, with what are clearly clouds of something, and the individual stars within it are distinct enough, in clear conditions, to suggest their arrangement, the way that up close you can make out the individual trees in what from a distance appears as a single body of forest. The older man knows this sky the way the girl knows the grass thoroughly, practically, in the way of someone who has been using it for a long time. He knows which stars rise first in the evening and which follow, and in what order, and how that order shifts across the seasons. He knows which stars mark the north, because north is a direction with specific meaning when you are navigating by landmarks in a landscape as flat and featureless as parts of Beringia. He knows which stars are reliable and which seem to drift slightly, which we now understand to be the planets, though he has no model for what they are beyond the observation that they move differently from the others. He sits by the low fire on the clear nights and looks at the sky for long periods of time with an expression that you have never been able to fully read. Not the alert expression of someone looking for information, though information is part of it, but something more settled, more given over. The expression of someone for whom looking at the sky is not just a navigational tool, but something that has become, over a long life of doing it, a kind of practice, a relationship with something that does not look back but is, somehow, consistently present. What does he think about when he looks at the stars? You do not know. You know what you think about, which is sometimes practical confirming direction, gauging the season by the positions of the major constellations, and sometimes something else entirely, something that the practical thinking opens into when it has finished its work and the mind is left alone with the size of what it is looking at. The size. This is the thing that the sky over Beringia communicates most forcefully, the sheer scale of it, the distance represented by the faintest stars, which are so far away that the light reaching your eyes left those stars long before you were born, long before any human was born, long before the earth was the temperature it is now. The night sky is a kind of time machine, is a display of the past at various depths, is a demonstration that the present moment, this moment right now, is a very small thing embedded in a very large context, and that this is not cause for despair but for something else, something closer to the specific relief of smallness, the relief of not being the most important thing in the frame, in the quiet that follows a long day's walking, with the fire low and the children already asleep and the night sound of the wind in the grass all around you. The sky has the quality of company, not human company. It does not answer. It does not respond to anything you do or think or feel. But it is there, and it is consistent, and it has been there on every night of your life, including the nights when everything else seemed uncertain. And it will be there tonight, and that constancy, the absolute reliability of the stars being where they are when the clouds allow them to be seen, is something that you have, perhaps without naming it as such, built part of your sense of stability around. Other people are also looking at this sky tonight. In the camps of the coastal people you met 2 days ago, someone is perhaps also awake and looking at the same stars. In the camps of the people further east and south, the same stars are overhead, at slightly different angles, the familiar configurations shifted by the curvature of the earth in ways that experienced travellers notice and use. All over the world tonight, wherever the sky is clear and wherever someone is awake to look at it, people are looking at these same stars, the same physical objects, the same vast distances, the same ancient light that left its source before any city was built or any language was written down. This is one of the few truly universal human experiences, not universal in the sense of being culturally shared, because the names and the stories attached to the stars vary enormously from culture to culture, but universal in the sense that the physical experience, the act of looking up at the same stars from wherever you happen to be standing, is available to all humans, in all times, in all places where the sky is clear, and it produces, In most people who give it genuine attention, something recognizable, a combination of wonder and smallness, and the particular calm that comes from encountering something that is not going to be affected by anything you do. You have been lying on your back looking at the sky for some time now. The ground beneath you is hard and slightly uneven, but you have become accustomed to this in the way that travelers become accustomed to the surfaces they sleep on, not by finding them comfortable, exactly, but by the body adjusting its expectations so that what is available becomes sufficient. The stars move across the sky too slowly for you to notice the movement directly, but they move. Over the course of the night, the configurations that were in the east when the darkness began will be in the west by dawn, having made their slow arc across the sky in the time you are sleeping, moving in the way that the sky appears to move from the perspective of someone on the surface of a rotating planet. Though this explanation is thousands of years from being available to anyone, what the older man knows from watching this movement for 50 years is that it is reliable. The stars move as they always have moved. The sky turns as it always has turned. The particular star that marks north does not, in any of his experience, stop marking north. This reliability is not nothing. In a world where so much is uncertain weather, hunting, the condition of the terrain ahead, the intentions of strangers, the absolute reliability of the sky is a form of comfort that is practical first, and emotional second, and the two are not easily separable. A meteor crosses the sky, not a dramatic one, just a brief line of light, a quick, bright thread drawn across the black and gone in less than a second. The older man does not react to it in any visible way. You notice it, and for a moment you watch the place where it was, which is already just sky, as though something might follow. Nothing follows. The sky is as it was. The stars are where they are. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf calls, a long sound, rising and falling, with a quality that carries its own kind of beauty, even in a world where beauty is not yet a concept that anyone has found a word for. It carries across the flat ground with the clarity of sound in cold air, reaching you from far enough away that the wolf is invisible, absent, present only in its voice. After a moment, another wolf answers. Same quality, different pitch. The call and response of animals checking on each other across distances, maintaining the connection that the darkness makes necessary. Then quiet again. The fire breathes. The stars turn. The wolf sound leaves a quality in the air, the way a stone thrown in water leaves ripples that persist after the stone is gone, and in that quality there is something that takes you, if you let it, down into the threshold of sleep, where the boundaries of things become less precise, and the distance between here and there, between now and 3,000 years from now, between you and the stars above you becomes negotiable. Let it be negotiable. Let the boundaries soften. You have crossed enough things today. Let the night do its crossing now, from waking to something else, from the world to whatever the night carries you toward. The older man is still looking at the sky. The stars are still there. Everything is as it should be. On the 23rd day, which is the last day of crossing, you stop for a long time on a rise and look back west. Not because there is anything specific to see in that direction, the corridor stretches back the way you came. The same grass and sky, an occasional far animal that it has been for 3 weeks. You stop because the older man stopped, and the older man stopped because something in him, some internal calibration that you do not fully understand but have learned to trust, indicated that this was a moment worth pausing in. What he is looking at is not the landscape, or not only the landscape. He is looking at where he came from at the span of time and distance that represents his life, insofar as a life can be represented by a direction. Everything he has ever known, everyone who was important to him before the people walking with him now, every winter camp and summer hunting ground and river crossing that made him the person standing here looking west, all of that is in that direction. Behind him, on the other side of a corridor that took 3 weeks to cross on foot, he does not look sad. Or rather, sadness is not the primary quality in his expression, though it may be present as an element. What is primary is something more settled, the look of someone who has made a decision that is now complete, that has passed from the category of decision into the category of fact, and who is taking a final measurement of the distance between what was and what is. You look west too. The wind is from that direction today, which means it carries the particular smell of the corridor you just crossed, grass and cold water, and the faint mineral smell of permafrost, the smell of Beringia. You breathe it in. It is the smell of the world as you have known it, the smell that has been present since the earliest memory you have of being outside, which is the smell of the world itself, since inside and outside were never as firmly separated in your experience as they will be for people who live in permanent structures thousands of years from now. The younger child has been picked up by the woman and is riding on her back, which means he is tired in the way that is beyond the reach of ordinary will, the bone-deep tiredness of a small person who has been walking for 3 weeks. He is not asleep, his eyes are open, and he is looking at something that may or may not be the same thing the adults are looking at, maybe only the middle distance, the particular non-focus of a child who is too tired to focus on anything specific. The older girl is looking east. She has already turned. In this small difference of orientation, this distinction between looking at where you came from and looking at where you are going is something that does not need to be articulated. The difference between the temperaments that end up in the long story of human migration as the scouts and the last to leave, the early adopters and the carriers of memory. Both are necessary. Every migration needs both the ones who look forward and the ones who look back, because the looking back is how you remember what you are, and the looking forward is how you find where you are going. And a group that does only one of these things becomes either lost in movement or rooted in a place past its usefulness. The girl and the man are, in this moment, the two poles of the group's orientation, and between them, between her forward attention and his backward one, is where the group actually lives. In the productive tension of what was and what might be, you are somewhere in between, looking both directions, not quite in either one. The wind shifts, coming now from the northeast, from the direction of the coast you reached yesterday, and with it comes the smell of the sea, a different quality than the corridor smell, saltier and colder and bigger, the smell of something very large and very deep and very old. It is the smell of the Pacific, or the Proto-Pacific, the vast water that has been here longer than the corridor, that was here when the corridor was sea, and will still be here when the corridor is sea again. You put the west behind you, you turn east. The land here is the beginning of something that will take thousands of years to fully reveal itself. Right now it looks much like the land you have been crossing grass and sky, and the occasional low shrub, animals in the distance, the smell of water, but it is different in a way that is difficult to specify. A different quality of being here-ness. A land that has not been crossed as many times, where the human footfall is lighter and the animal life consequently less adjusted to the presence of people. The horses here are slightly different, smaller, more uniformly coloured. The horses of a micro-region that has been separated from the western horses by the corridor itself for long enough that slight differences have accumulated. The bison, when you see them, are also slightly different, the west and east varieties having diverged over the millennia of the corridor's existence from the same ancestral stock into two subspecies that look almost identical but are, in the ways that matter to other bison, distinct. This is what the corridor has done to the biology of the northern world, not just allowed passage, but managed it, allowed some movement and restricted other movement, connected some populations and separated others, creating the conditions under which two similar things became two slightly different things over the course of thousands of years of partial isolation. The corridor as filter, as selective membrane. The corridor as just mechanism of diversification. And now you are through the filter, on the eastern side, in the land that the filter was protecting, and the question of what you bring with you, what you add to this side, what difference your presence makes is a question that will not have an answer for thousands of years, when it will be answerable only in the aggregate, in the language of DNA and archaeology, and the distribution of language families. What you bring is yourself. What you bring is the people with you, their specific knowledge and capabilities and the specific qualities of their attention and care. What you bring is the fire-making technique that the woman carries in her hands, and the sky-reading knowledge that the old man carries in his memory, and the girl's fierce observational intelligence, and the boy's quick emotional life, and whatever combination of memory and skill and luck has gotten you this far, and you bring the memory of the corridor, not as a concept or a theory, but as a physical experience, an embodied knowledge of what that land felt like under your feet, and what it smelled like in the morning, and what the animals were like when they were alive, and moving, and enormous in the early light. That memory is yours, and it is specific, and it is irreplaceable, and it is already. as the land you are now standing on claims more of your attention, beginning to recede slightly, not fading exactly, but taking on the quality that experiences take on when they are over, when the doing has ended and the having done it has begun. You will tell stories about this crossing. Not in the way that historians tell stories linearly, with dates, with documentation, but in the way that this time tells all stories, which is with the body, through demonstration and gesture, and the particular intonation that carries lived experience rather than learned information. You will tell your children about the mammoth in the dawn, not with those words, but with words that carry the same image, the enormous stillness of the animal, the quality of the light, the way the sound moved through the ground. And they will tell their children, or some version of it will be preserved in some form of telling, and that telling will change over generations the way all transmitted stories change, accumulating the inflections of each new teller, losing some details and gaining others, the specific becoming general, and the general becoming symbolic, and the symbolic becoming the kind of story that is told not because it happened, but because it is true, in the deeper sense that stories can be true when the facts of them are no longer recoverable. The corridor will be a story about a great water parting, or a story about a first crossing to a new world, or a story about a time when the animals were giants and the sky was closer and the fire burned without needing to be fed, or all of these, or none, or something else entirely that preserves, in ways that future people cannot see, the texture of this specific experience, the cold and the grass and the wind and the water and the stars and the older man's patient back as he moved always slightly ahead of you, reading the landscape like the library he had spent his whole life assembling. For now, the east opens before you. The land is new in the way that all land is new before you have learnt it. The sky is the same sky, turned slightly on its axis, the familiar stars at slightly unfamiliar angles. The wind is cold and real and carries the smell of something you do not yet know the name for. You step forward. The earth receives you, as it always has, without preference, without judgment, without the slightest distinction between the feet of the people who have been here a long time and the feet of those who have just arrived. This is the only welcome the earth gives. But it is unconditional, and it is enough, and it has been enough for every living thing that has ever walked across any ground anywhere. Take another step, and another. The crossing is complete. The new land is beginning. Walk quietly into it. The tools you carry weigh almost nothing, individually, but together they constitute a kind of portable civilization, a condensed version of everything that makes survival in this landscape possible, and the accumulation of small weights over the course of a day's walking becomes, by evening, the solid and familiar heaviness of everything you need. Consider what is in the bundle on your back. Not everything, this is not an inventory, not an accounting, but a meditation on what it means to carry the right things into an uncertain world. There are blades. Several of them, made from flint struck with the controlled precision of someone who has been doing this since childhood, who learned by watching, and then by failing, and then by developing the particular sensitivity of hand that allows you to feel, through the striking tool, the exact moment when the force is correctly directed, and the flake will detach cleanly rather than shattering. The blades are not identical, each one was made for a slightly different purpose, or became useful for a slightly different purpose after it was made, and the specific shape of each one reflects both the intention of its maker and the particular qualities of the stone it came from. Flint is not everywhere. In some parts of the world you will cross through in the future. Flint is abundant, lying in nodules in the chalk or in gravel beds where it accumulated over millions of years. In other parts, it is absent entirely, and the people who live in those parts use obsidian, or chert, or any of the other fine-grained stones that can be worked to an edge sharper than any metal that will be produced for another 10,000 years. The blades in your bundle came from a specific place, a specific outcropping where the flint was particularly good, dense and fine-grained, and predictable in the way it fractured, and they were made there, or carried from there by people who knew the value of the material. There is a pointed tool of antler. Antler is not bone. It is faster growing, more dense, more elastic. The material that a deer or reindeer grows and sheds on an annual cycle that makes it, uniquely among animal materials, renewable in the human lifetime. The point of the antler tool has been worked to a fine taper, the surface rubbed smooth against stone until it carries a sheen, and the tip is fine enough to pierce hide without tearing it, which is the precision required for sewing, which is how clothing is made in this world and how clothing was made in the world long before this world. Clothing. This is perhaps the most consequential of all human technologies in the context of the northern migration, and it is the most invisible in the archaeological record because it is made of organic materials that do not survive. But the needles survive. The eyed needles, tiny, fine, made of bone or ivory or antler, with a hole pierced through the thin end that allows thread to pass through, are among the most sophisticated manufactured objects of this period, requiring extraordinary control of fine-grained materials and a level of planning and precision that leaves nothing to chance. The needles that appear in the archaeological record of this period and the periods before it are evidence of tailored clothing, clothing that fits the body, that has seams and joints and closures, clothing that is not a draped skin but a constructed garment, designed to keep the cold out at the neck and wrists and ankles, the places where the cold most efficiently finds its way in. Without tailored clothing, the crossing of Beringia is not possible. The temperatures here, in the depths of winter, are not survivable with a draped skin. The people who live in the Arctic today, and the people who have lived there for thousands of years before the present, all have clothing traditions of extraordinary sophistication, layered systems of fur and hide that trap air for insulation, that allow moisture to pass outward while keeping cold air out, that are designed with the knowledge of how the body generates heat and loses it, and the specific ways in which each body part requires different treatment. The woman in your group is the primary maker of clothing. This is not a rigid gender division in any universal sense in different groups at different times. The work of making and maintaining clothing falls to different people. But in this group, it is her skill, her trained hands, her eye for the quality of a hide and her knowledge of how to prepare it and cut it and join it in the ways that will last through a season of hard use. She made the clothing on the children's backs. She made, in pieces and over time, the clothing you are wearing. The clothing you are wearing is warm enough. This is the most important thing that can be said about it. It is warm enough for the temperatures you have encountered, which have dipped, on the coldest nights, to the kind of cold that makes the air feel dense, and the breath come in visible clouds that hang for a moment before the wind disperses them. On those nights, the layered system of what you wear, the close-fitting inner layer against the skin, and the looser outer layer that traps air between itself and the inner layer, has been the difference between sleeping adequately and sleeping miserably, and sleeping miserably in very cold weather over the course of a 3-week crossing is the kind of cumulative stress that degrades everything else: judgment, energy, mood, the capacity to make the small decisions that add up to survival. There is rope. Or rather, there is cordage, several lengths of it, made from plant fibre and animal sinew twisted together in the manner that produces a strength greater than either material separately. The cordage is used for everything, and nothing specific, because that is what cordage is in this world, the all-purpose connective tissue that holds the human project together. The thing that lets you attach one thing to another thing and have the attachment be reliable. You use it to lash your bundle closed. You use it to secure the children's packs when they carry packs. You use it to set snares. You use it to bind a broken handle to a blade when the handle cracks and needs reinforcement before you can make a better one. There is fire-making material, there is waterproofing material. There is a small container of dried fat that serves as both food and, when rubbed into leather, as a treatment against the drying and cracking that the cold promotes in any organic material exposed to it. There is medicinal material, dried plants that the woman knows how to prepare and use for specific conditions. The compressed knowledge of generations of observation about what plants do, what things, preserved in the physical form of the plants themselves, because there is no other way to preserve it. All of this together weighs perhaps 15 kilograms. It is enough to maintain life in the conditions you are moving through. It is not more than enough. There is no room in the bundle for comfort items, for the things that are nice to have but not essential, for anything that cannot justify itself in terms of what it enables or prevents. This is the discipline of travel in a world without supply chains, without the option of acquiring what you need from someone else who specializes in providing it. Everything you need, you carry. Everything you carry, you need. There is a specific beauty in this constraint, if you let yourself see it. The bundle on your back represents a kind of thinking, a model of the world, specifically of what the world requires, expressed in physical form. The selection of what to carry and what to leave behind is the same kind of thinking as the selection of what to remember and what to forget, what to pass on to children and what to let dissolve. It is the editing of the universe down to the essential, the practice of identifying what actually matters when everything that merely seems to matter has been left by the side of the trail. The tools press gently against your back with each step. The blades and the cordage and the fire-making materials and the fat and the medicine, all of it moving with you, all of it part of you for the duration of this crossing, as much a part of your forward motion as the legs that are doing the walking. You will not always carry exactly these things. As the days of this journey have passed, the bundle has shifted. Some things used up and not replaced, other things found and added. The weight and composition changing incrementally in response to what has been encountered and what has been needed. This is also a kind of knowledge, the knowledge that the inventory is not fixed, that the essential is situation dependent, that what you need today is not necessarily what you needed yesterday or will need tomorrow. The older man's bundle is lighter than yours, not because he is old and needs the accommodation he has not asked for and would not accept the accommodation, but because over a long life of travel, he has refined his sense of the essential down to something very close to its minimum. He carries the things he would need if every other member of the group were gone, which is not pessimism but the baseline pragmatism of someone who has outlived group members before and knows that self-sufficiency is the foundation on which everything else is built. The woman's bundle is the heaviest. It is heavier than any bundle should be, and you have offered to redistribute the weight, and she has declined in the way that she declines, things that are not open for discussion, not rudely, not dismissively, but with the absolute finality of someone who has thought about this more carefully than you have and whose answer is no. She carries what she carries because she knows what it is for. The extra weight is a form of insurance, a hedge against the scenarios that worry her most, which are not the dramatic ones, not the lion, not the river, but the quiet ones. The scenarios where someone is sick or cold or in need of something specific and the specific thing is in her bundle. This is where her form of intelligence lives, not in the stars or the stones, but in the bundle, in the compressed knowledge of what could go wrong and what might help, and the commitment to having the second thing available when the first thing happens. Tonight the bundles lean against the earth beside the sleeping people, patient and quiet, holding their contents in the dark, ready for morning. The tools are resting. The hands that made them and used them are resting. The knowledge of how to make them and use them is resting in the minds of the people who hold it, available for morning, unchanged by the night. Let your own weight be set down now. Whatever you have been carrying the day, the week, the accumulated weight of things that needed to be done and thoughts that needed to be thought, let it rest beside you in the dark, as the bundles rest beside the sleeping people of Beringia, patient and available and not going anywhere. You will pick it up again in the morning, it will still be there, but for now it can rest, and so can you, and the night can do what the night is for. On the 8th day, the light changes. Not the quality of the light, not a shift in colour or intensity that you could point to and describe, but the angle of it. The sun, which has been following a particular arc across the sky since you began this crossing, has shifted slightly in its path. The arc a fraction lower today than it was a week ago. The shadows cast by the grass stems at midday, slightly longer than they were. This is the beginning of the change from the long day season to the short day season, the slow tilt of the earth on its axis that will, over the coming months, pull the sun lower and lower in the southern sky until the days are only a few hours long and the nights consume everything. You notice the change before you consciously register it, the way the body notices many things before the mind gets around to articulating them. There is a quality in the afternoon that is slightly different from the previous afternoons. Not worse, not better, just different in the way that things that are changing always feel slightly different before you have named the change. A quality of earlier settling, of the light pulling away from the earth a few minutes before you expected it to. The older man noticed it earlier than you did. He has been watching the sun's arc since the crossing began, checking it against his internal calendar, the accumulated knowledge of 50 years of watching seasons turn in the northern world. In his internal calendar, the present position of the sun in the sky correlates with specific things about the state of the landscape and the behavior of animals, and the appropriate priorities for a group of people moving through open country. He has made adjustments to his pace and direction based on this information, in ways so subtle that you only noticed them after the fact, when you looked back at the decisions made over the past several days and saw the pattern in them. The turning of the season in Beringia is not the same turning that people in temperate climates experience. The contrast between seasons here is extreme between the continuous daylight of midsummer, when the sun barely sets and the warmth comes in long mild waves that seem to last forever, and the brief cold bright days of autumn, and the long dark winters that follow, is a contrast that reshapes everything about how life is lived and how time is perceived. Summer in Beringia is an urgency. Everything that needs to happen in the warm months must happen in the warm months, not because there is no other time, but because the warm months are the time of biological productivity, of grass growing and animals fattening and daylight, extending far enough into the evening to make the most of the growing season, and missing the urgency of the summer means being less prepared for the winter, and being less prepared for the winter in this place has consequences that are not recoverable. The people who live year-round in these latitudes have organised their lives around this contrast in ways that are so fundamental that they are barely visible as organisation. They just are, the way things are done. The summer is for gathering and moving and hunting, for building up reserves, for being outside and active in every possible moment of usable weather. The winter is for the other things, for the indoor work, the tool making and clothing making, for the conversations that take longer to have than summer allows, for the stories that need the long evenings of darkness to be told in, for the particular intimacy of people who spend months sharing warmth and space and the limited light of a small fire. Your crossing falls in the transition between these modes late enough in the season that the midsummer urgency has passed, early enough that the full grip of autumn has not yet closed down the landscape. The grass is still green in the low places where moisture collects. The animals are still in their summer ranges, not yet beginning the migrations toward their winter grounds. The days are still long enough to walk for most of them, and camp in something approaching light rather than full dark. But the change is coming. You can feel it in the cooler nights, in the way the morning takes slightly longer to warm than it did 2 weeks ago, in the particular quality of the light that the older man has been reading for the past several days. The season is turning, and your crossing is timed against the turning, and the decisions made about pace and direction priorities over the coming days will be influenced by the sense of the season as a clock that does not tick but that the older man reads as naturally as you read the position of the sun. The seasonal clock matters enormously in this world. Not in the way of appointments and deadlines, not in the way of a world organised around the measurement of time, but in the way of thresholds and transitions, of the difference between doing something in the right season and doing it in the wrong season, which is often the difference between it being possible and it not being possible at all. Crossing a high mountain pass, for instance, is possible in autumn and impossible once the deep winter snow has closed it. Hunting certain animals is productive in the months when those animals are in a particular place, following their seasonal pattern, and nearly impossible when they have moved to the places they go in the other seasons. Harvesting certain plant materials is timed to specific weeks of the year when the nutrients are at their maximum concentration, and the same plants a month later are either not present or not worth the effort. All of this knowledge exists in the group you are travelling with, not as written calendar but as embodied knowledge, as the felt sense of what time it is in the year, and what that means for the decisions that need to be made. The older man is the most sophisticated holder of this knowledge, but the woman has her version of it, and you have yours. And even the older girl is developing the early form of it, noting the things she sees now against the things she saw at this time last year, and building the comparison that is the beginning of the seasonal sense. The younger child does not yet have it. He lives in a more immediate time, the time of this moment, this hunger, this cold, this warmth, this interesting thing seen in the grass. The past and the future are present in him only in the loosest sense, as the general background of experience rather than as the specific reference points that the older members of the group use to navigate. This is not a deficiency. It is the appropriate relationship to time for a child of his age. And there is something valuable in it, the way that full presence in the current moment is valuable, the way that the direct unmediated experience of now is something that adults, with their planning and their comparisons and their constant reference to what was and what will be, sometimes lose access to. You watch the light now with a consciousness of its angle that you did not have a week ago. Not obsessively, you do not stand and stare at the sun or take its position with any particular regularity, but the awareness has been activated. The perceptual channel that was closed is now open, and information that was flowing past you unregistered is now flowing in and being added to the accumulated model of where you are in time as well as in space. Where you are in time. Late in the year's mild season. The season is turning toward the cold. And the crossing needs to be completed before the cold is established. Not because crossing in winter is impossible, but because it is much harder. Because the river crossings are more dangerous. Because the fuel for fires is harder to find. Because the animals change their patterns and the food sources you have been using may not be available in the same way. The older man knows all of this. He is already factoring it into the pace, into the direction, into the decisions that look like small navigational choices but are actually temporal decisions. Decisions about time as much as about space. The decision to push a little harder on good days, to take a slightly more direct route than the most comfortable one, to extend the walking day slightly rather than stopping at the first adequate campsite. The grass is bending in the wind. The light is at its afternoon angle, slightly lower than last week. The animals in the distance are doing what they do, eating and moving and making the small, constant calculations that keep them alive in this landscape. The season is turning. The world is adjusting. You are adjusting with it, as you have always adjusted, as all living things adjust to the slow rotation of the year, not by resisting it or ignoring it, but by being in relationship with it, by reading it and responding, by making the 10,000 small accommodations that constitute a life lived in partnership with the way things actually are. There is a particular peace in this. Not the peace of comfort or the peace of certainty, but the peace of being appropriately calibrated, of moving at the right speed in the right direction for the time of year and the state of the landscape and the capacity of the people around you. The peace of fit, of adequate adjustment, of being in right relationship with a world that is not asking you to do more than what is actually required. The sun is moving toward the western horizon. In the east, the sky has already begun to take on the pale grey of evening. The walking continues for a while longer, the pace maintained, the direction held. Somewhere ahead, the camp of tonight. Somewhere above, the stars that are waiting behind the light. The season turns, and turning with it is enough. There is a particular kind of quiet that exists only in open country, far from any permanent human settlement, and it is something that takes days to fully enter. In the first few days of this crossing, the quiet was still uncomfortable in the way of things you are not used to. The absence of the ambient sound that surrounds human life, even in its simplest forms, the sounds of other people, of cooking, of tools being worked, of the particular continuous low-level noise of a camp. That absence has a presence of its own in the early days. You notice the silence the way you notice a missing tooth, by the gap it leaves, by the expectations it violates. But by the 8th day, and then more fully by the 12th, something has shifted. The silence has become the background rather than the absence. You have stopped expecting the ambient sounds and started hearing what is actually there, which is not nothing. It is only nothing if you compare it to the noise of permanent settlement. Lewd. Compared to actual silence, the silence of an empty room, the silence of a closed ear, it is full. It is rich. It is a continuous texture of sound that requires attention and patience to distinguish into its components. The wind in the grass is not a single sound, but many the high silvery sound of the seed heads moving against each other, distinct from the lower, broader sound of the stems bending, which is distinct again from the occasional sharper sound, when a particularly strong gust finds a cluster of taller stalks and presses them hard enough to produce a brief rushing sound before they spring back. Each of these is present simultaneously, layered on each other, the same way the individual instruments in a large ensemble are present simultaneously, but become separable when you learn to listen for the specific texture of each one. Birds. There are birds here that you have been hearing since the first day, without always identifying them, a kind of background bird sound that is part of the landscape the same way the wind sound is, that you stop consciously hearing the way you stop consciously hearing your own breathing. But when you pay attention to it, the bird sound is also various, also rich, composed of species you recognize and species you do not, each contributing its specific call to the general texture of open country bird sound in this season. The bird that wakes you some mornings, not always, but sometimes, when the wind is low and the early light is just arriving, is a sound that you associate with good weather and easy walking days, a clear rising pattern of notes that carries across the flat ground with the ease of sound in cold air, and that produces, when you hear it in the half-sleep of early morning, a feeling of something confirmed, something expected and arrived at. There are also the sounds of animals moving through the grass at night. Not frightening sounds, not threatening. You have long since learned to distinguish between the sounds that require attention and the sounds that do not, between the movement of something small and the movement of something large, between the casual passing of an animal on its own business and the more purposeful movement of something approaching. The sounds at night are mostly the former small things, or large things that are not interested in you, moving through the dark on trajectories of their own that have nothing to do with your camp. And beneath all of this, on the still nights, there is something else, a frequency so low that hearing is not quite the right word for how you receive it. The permafrost, which lies not far below the surface, is itself not entirely silent. The slow thermal expansion and contraction of deeply frozen ground produces occasional sounds, deep, resonant, brief, that come from below rather than above, from inside the earth rather than from its surface, and that have the quality of something very old, communicating something you cannot translate. You have stopped being afraid of this sound. In the first nights of the crossing, it would wake you, and for a moment before the mind was fully engaged, the body would respond to it with the animal alarm of something large moving underground. But the mind catches up quickly enough, and the pattern has been established over many nights now. The deep sounds are not threats, they are the earth itself, the frozen interior of this landscape doing what it does as the temperature shifts between the cold of the night and the slightly less cold of the day. The silence of Beringia, the relative, various, layered silence of open country has done something to you over the course of this crossing that would be difficult to articulate, but that you feel clearly as a change. It has slowed something, not your pace. The walking pace has remained consistent, set by the needs of the distance and the condition of the terrain. But something internal has slowed, some frequency of thought that runs faster when you are in the ambient noise of settled life and that, given the quiet of open country for long enough, finds its way to a lower, less effortful pace. The mind in open country silence is different from the mind in habitual noise. It is not more productive, necessarily, not sharper or more creative in any measurable way, but it is more spacious. The thoughts have room to develop before the next thought arrives. The space between one thing and the next becomes habitable, becomes actually pleasant, not dead time, not empty time, but available time, open time, the kind of time in which things can settle that have been held in suspension. This is the medicine of long travel through open country, the medicine that the older man has been dosing himself with for 50 years, and that is, perhaps, part of why he is the way he is. That particular quality of settledness, of depth, of not being hurried in any direction by anything internal. He has spent much of his life in the kind of quiet that produces this quality, and it has produced it in him, and walking with him for 3 weeks is producing a faint echo of it in you. You carry it with you into the day's walking. The mornings especially have a quality that you have started to protect the first hour after waking, before the fire is rebuilt and the day's logistics assert themselves, when the camp is still and the light is just arriving, and the world has the quality of something not yet started, not yet claimed by the day's agenda. You have started to use this hour differently than you did at the beginning of the crossing, more quietly, more attentively, less as a period to get through before the real day begins, and more as the thing itself, the primary experience of which the walking and the camping and the decision-making are the context. This is a discovery that you will not have the language to name, but that you will carry with you into the eastern land, and that will inform, in ways you cannot predict, how you move through the world once the crossing is complete. The knowledge that silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something, a particular quality of attention, a particular relationship with what is actually here, as opposed to what you brought with you, is the kind of knowledge that does not fit into a bundle or a toolkit. It fits into the person. It becomes the person, slowly, over the days and weeks of being in the conditions that produce it. Right now, in this afternoon, the silence is exactly what it is. The wind is in the grass. The birds are somewhere, calling to each other in their seasonal way. The earth below you is frozen several meters down, and occasionally says something in its deep ice language about the temperature gradient between the surface and the permafrost. Your feet move through the grass. The grass bends and springs back. The walking is quiet because the walking has always been quiet, and the quiet has always been medicine, and the medicine has always been free and available, and completely reliable in the way that the deepest things are reliable, not by being constant, but by always being what they are, whatever they are, which is everything you need. The afternoon opens before you. The walking continues. The silence holds the whole landscape in its particular clear embrace, and you are held in it, small and present and adequately here. There is nowhere else you need to be. Let the quiet in. It has been waiting. The third river you cross in Beringia is the widest. It is not the deepest or the fastest. You have crossed deeper rivers and faster rivers in the weeks before this crossing began, in the territory you came from, in the rivers of the eastern steppe that drain the mountains to the south and carry their meltwater north toward the sea. But it is wide enough that the far bank is a specific visual destination rather than an obvious next step, wide enough that the quality of the light changes between the two banks as the angle of the sun shifts during the time it takes to cross. Wide rivers mean more than the practical challenge of crossing them. Wide rivers mean that they have been here for a long time, that they have been carrying water long enough to have worked their way wide, cutting their channel down and at the same time widening it through the lateral erosion that happens in the outer curves of bends, where the current runs fastest and presses hardest against the bank. Wide rivers means sediment, the fine material carried in suspension from somewhere upstream, deposited in the shallows and the banks and the floodplain, building up the flat, fertile land that borders the most productive rivers in the world. The sediment of this river, as you wade through it, rises in small billowing clouds from the disturbed bottom and moves downstream faster than you are moving across, marking your path through the water with a brief trail of dark material before the current takes it. The sediment is not just dirt, it is ground-up continent. It is the physical material of mountains and hillsides and glacier beds that the river has been gathering and transporting since the ice released it. The literal substance of the landscape translated by water into something portable, something distributed. Rivers are the circulatory system of the landscape. They carry what the land releases, minerals and organic material, and the seeds and spores of plants that use running water as a dispersal mechanism, and they distribute it according to the logic of water moving from high to low, from fast to slow, from erosion to deposition. The same river that cuts canyon walls in its upper reaches drops sediment gently in its lower ones, building the deltaic fans and floodplains that are among the most fertile environments on Earth. You cross the wide river in the same way you have crossed every other carefully, reading the water as you go, adjusting the line of crossing to the depth and current and the position of the best footing. The older man goes second this time, which is unusual, and you understand from his choice to let you go first that he is not fully confident in his own stability in moving water today, and you hold to the position ahead of him where he can see you and gauge the depth from where your body is in the water. He reaches the far bank without difficulty. But there is a moment in the middle of the crossing where the current is strongest and the water is at his chest, where his progress pauses for a few seconds and his face shows the particular concentration of someone applying all available resources to a single task. You watch him from the far bank and feel the particular quality of attention that you give to people you are responsible for when they are doing something difficult, not anxious, because anxiety would not help, but clear, present, entirely there. He comes through. He comes up the bank with the deliberateness of someone who is not going to hurry anything anymore, and he stands on the far bank and breathes and looks back at the river with an expression that contains something you do not expect, something that might be satisfaction, or might be the specific feeling of having done something that was harder than you wanted to admit it would be. On the far bank of the wide river, there are willows. More willows than you have seen anywhere in the crossing so far, a dense thicket of them. Their branches at this time of year stripped to their winter structure, the particular thin weeping branch pattern of willows without leaves that makes them look like descriptions of willows rather than the thing itself. But their roots are deep in the riverbank, and their presence means something. Reliable water, reliable material for making fire, and in the right season, medicinal bark that can be stripped and prepared and used for pain. The woman stops at the edge of the willows and looks at them for a moment, then moves into them and begins selecting branches with the particular purposefulness of someone who has identified what they are looking for. She takes thin young branches, flexible, with the right quality of wood inside the bark. She takes more than she needs for any immediate use, because the right material is not always where you are when you need it, and carrying extra weight in the form of material that might be critical later is the kind of calculation that people who have ever been without the right material at the wrong time learn to make automatically. The river sounds continue behind you as you move into the willows. The sound of the water over the gravel bed, the particular low roar of moving water in a wide channel, the sound that rivers make when they are neither fast enough to be violent nor slow enough to be silent. It is one of the most consistently comforting sounds in the world, and you know this, not because you have analysed why, but because you have been in the presence of rivers enough times to have registered the pattern, the way the sound of moving water reduces something that was tight, makes something that was compressed a little more available, releases a small thing that is always in the background of everything, slightly held. The afternoon is advancing. The willows cast their thin winter shadows in the low sun. The older man is sitting on a root-exposed section of bank, resting in the direct way that he rests now when resting is available without preamble, without the social manoeuvring that younger people sometimes feel they need to do around the admission of needing to rest. He simply sits, he rests. He looks at the river with the blank and peaceful attention of someone who has nothing specific to think about, and is content with the content of the present moment. You sit beside him. Not speaking, there is nothing that needs to be said. The river says what it says, which is something like, "Here I am, and I have always been here, and I will be here after you, and the water I am made of has been many things before it was a river, and will be many things after, and right now it is this. Right now it is moving through this landscape, in this light, at this speed, toward the sea, which is also the river's sea in the sense that the river has been building toward it since its headwaters, and everything it carries will arrive there eventually, the sediment and the minerals and the small organic materials and the memory in the water molecules themselves, of every place the water has been. What does a river carry? In the physical sense, rock and mineral and organic material and the dissolved chemistry of the geology it has moved through. In the other sense, the sense that is harder to articulate but not less real, the history of every place it has passed through, the memory of every season's worth of snowmelt that found its way to this channel, the record of every flood and drought that has altered its course or its volume over the thousands of years of its existence. The river does not know it carries all of this. The river is just the river. But the record is there, in the sediment, in the chemistry, in the specific mixture of materials that this river carries and no other river exactly duplicates, because no other river has travelled this specific path, through this specific geology in this specific climate. You are also carrying something. The record of the places you have been, the specific mixture of experiences that has made you the person sitting here on this riverbank in this light. No other person has travelled exactly this path, through exactly these experiences in exactly this way. The mixture is yours. The record is in you, the way the river's history is in the river. The older man stands. The resting is over. The woman has finished collecting her branches and is rebundling the pack. The children, who have been exploring the edge of the willows with the particular absorption of children in a new microhabitat, come back to the group without being called. The afternoon walking resumes. The river sound fades behind you, replaced gradually by the grass sound and the wind sound, and then these two settle into the background where they live, and the walking is just the walking, and the land is just the land, and the carrying continues, as it always continues, as it has always continued. Let it continue for you too, now, into the night. Whatever you are carrying, let the river have a little of it. Let it move downstream, away from where you are, into the current toward the sea. You can pick it up again tomorrow, if you need it. But right now, give the river what you can spare. The land keeps a record. Not in any form that requires intention or awareness, the land does not know it is keeping a record, any more than a river knows it is carrying sediment. But the record is there, in the layers of the ground, in the chemistry of the soil, in the pollen grains, and the charcoal fragments, and the bone fragments, and the occasional stone tool that sinks slowly into the accumulating material of each generation's lived experience and is preserved, in some cases for thousands of years, in a form that future people can read. Beneath your feet, as you walk, is a record of everything that has been here before you. the bones of animals that lived and died on this ground before the first human ever crossed it, the pollen of plants that grew here in climates that no longer exist in this place, the pollen from trees that have since retreated southward as the cold intensified, from grasses that no longer grow here because the temperature and moisture conditions that suited them have shifted, the remains of insects trapped in peat bogs that formed in the low places where the water collected, and the organic material accumulated faster than the decomposers could process it. In the future, scientists will drill into these peats and extract cores of material that are, in effect, diaries of the climate, the proportions of different kinds of pollen in each layer, telling the story of what the landscape looked like at each moment in time, the charcoal fragments recording fires, the isotopes of oxygen in the ancient ice telling the temperature of the years when the ice was laid down. The cores are read backward through time, each layer deeper a step further into the past, a kind of archaeology of the air and the water and the temperature of the world. What these cores will tell the scientists of the far future is something extraordinary about the world you are walking through, that it was, in climatic terms, a period of transition, that the temperatures had already risen significantly from the depths of the last glacial maximum and were continuing to rise, that the ice was retreating and the sea was rising, and the landscape was shifting in ways that were, on the scale of human perception, slow and barely visible, but on the scale of the geological record, rapid and decisive. The land is changing under you. Not in any way you can perceive in the span of your life. The grass looks much as it has always looked. The rivers run as they have always run. The animals follow the same patterns they have followed for as long as anyone alive can remember. But the deeper layers of the ground know something the surface does not fully show yet. The permafrost is warming, very slowly, and the chemistry of the soil at its margins is changing as the biological processes that the cold suppressed begin, incrementally, to resume. The tree line, far to the south where the temperatures are warm enough for trees, is moving northward, year by year, in increments too small to measure without the tools of future science, but real enough to record in the pollen layers that are accumulating in the bogs even now. None of this is available to you in any direct form. You cannot feel the permafrost warming, cannot see the tree line moving, cannot read the pollen record in the soil under your feet. But the older man, from 50 years of paying attention to the land, in the way that people pay attention to things they depend on, has noticed something. Not the large change, not the mechanism, not the cause, but some accumulation of small things that doesn't quite match what he would have expected from the accumulated wisdom of the generations before him. The winters have been, in his experience, slightly shorter than they were when he was young. The ice on certain rivers has been thinner than he remembers it being. Certain plants that he associates with the edge of the warm season have been present, in some years, at times when he would not have expected them. He has not formed these observations into a theory. He does not have the conceptual framework for the theory that would explain what he is observing. But he has the observations, stored in the same internal repository where he keeps everything he knows about the world, and they have made him, in ways he might not be able to articulate if asked, slightly less confident than he might otherwise be about the long-term reliability of conditions he was trained to expect. This is a form of knowledge, not complete knowledge, not the knowledge that comes with understanding the mechanism behind what is observed, but the knowledge that something is not quite the same as it was, that the model built on past experience requires some adjustment, some updating, some provisional qualification of the confident predictions that experience normally allows. The land keeps its record in forms that will not be readable for thousands of years, but the people on the land keep their own record, in the form of what they notice and what changes in what they notice. And the two records, the geological and the experiential, are, in the end, records of the same thing, which is the same world observed from different scales and by different kinds of attention. You walk across this recording landscape without knowing it is recording you. Your footsteps leave marks in the soft ground that will be covered by next year's growth and incorporated into the soil that accumulates here in the decades and centuries ahead. Your campfires leave charcoal that will eventually be buried and preserved and, in 10,000 years, will be available for radiocarbon dating, which will tell future scientists approximately when a fire was lit here, though not by whom or why. The bones of the food animals you have eaten and discarded along the way are being incorporated into the landscape in their own way, scattered by scavengers, broken by frost and thaw cycles, gradually dissolved by the chemistry of the soil. In a few cases, where conditions are exactly right, a bone will be preserved in a form that will last, but most will not. Most will disappear completely, returning to the elements that made them, completing the cycle that makes the grass, and the grass makes the animals, and the animals make the people, and the people make the fires, and the fires make the charcoal, and the charcoal stays, waiting. This is not melancholy. This is the way of things. The same process that takes the bones and disperses them is the process that maintains the fertility of the soil, that grows the grass, that feeds the animals, that sustain the people that are here, right now, walking through a world that is in the process of becoming what the world will be, and everything is in its right place in the process, including the dissolution, including the incorporation, including the return. The land receives, it always receives. It receives the footsteps and the fires and the bones and the pollen and the rain and the cold and the warmth, and it keeps its record, and the record endures long after everything else about any given moment has dissolved into the general flow of time. Your moment is being recorded now, not in any way you can access or read, but the charcoal from your fire last night is already settling into the soil. The impression of your footstep from this morning is already beginning to be filled by the slow movement of disturbed soil. The exhalations of breath that have been leaving your body since the crossing began have joined the atmosphere, dispersed and diluted, carrying the specific carbon signature of what you have eaten and how long you have been alive. The land knows you are here. It will hold that knowledge in its own way, in the language of chemistry and accumulation, long after any human memory of this crossing has dissolved. This is enough to know. This is, in the way of the deepest comforts, more than enough. The ground beneath you holds the weight you give it, as it has held every weight that has ever been placed on it. It does not judge the weight or question it. It simply holds. Let it hold you now. Let the long day's walking settle into the ground and stay there. Let your body grow heavy in the good way, the way of something returning to rest after having been in motion, something finding its right relationship with the ground. The land keeps its record. You are in it. You are held in it. Sleep. You take the watch on the 11th night. The older man has been doing it alone since the crossing began, and you have watched him do it, and tonight you woke in the pre-midnight dark and understood, without any external signal, that it was time to take some of that responsibility from him, that the long nights of solitary vigilance were a form of effort that required relief as surely as the walking required rest. He looked at you when you sat up and moved toward the fire, and there was in his look neither surprise nor resistance, just acknowledgement, the simple acceptance that the offer was being made and that the offer was appropriate. He nodded once, with the slight economy of movement that characterizes him in everything, and lay down in the place he had been sitting, and within a few minutes his breathing had taken on the regularity of deep sleep. He has been sleeping in snatches, you realize, not the long consolidated sleep of the adults who are not watching a few hours here, a doze there, the shallow, partly aware sleep of someone who has not fully given himself permission to rest because the rest of the group needed him to be available. In the days since the crossing began, he has seemed no different than usual, not slower, not less attentive, not reduced in any of the ways that sleep deprivation reduces a person. But lying down now, in the way he lay down, with the absolute surrender of someone finally releasing something they had been holding too long, he looks briefly, before the sleep takes him, like what he is, an old man who has been walking for 23 days and has been awake more of the nights than he should have been. You put wood on the fire. Not too much, the supply is limited and the night still has hours left, and the fire needs to last until morning without requiring you to forage for fuel in the dark. You have learned, over these weeks of watching the woman tend the fire and the older man tend the fire, how to read the current state of a fire and calculate what it needs and when to add, when to leave alone, when the coals are sufficient without additional wood, and when they need feeding to carry through a cold stretch of the night. The fire takes the new wood slowly. Orange light moves across the sleeping faces around you, and the faces in firelight have the particular quality they always have. The shadows emphasizing the structure beneath the skin, the light catching the closed eyes and the slack mouths of deep sleep, making everyone look both more themselves and more universal, more the specific person and more the general human, simultaneously. The night sounds are familiar now. You know this landscape after dark in a way you did not know it on the first nights of the crossing, when every sound required identification and assessment, and the darkness itself was unfamiliar in its specific quality. Now the familiar sounds are furniture, the wind in the grass, the occasional distant call of an animal, the deep periodic sounds from the permafrost, and you sit with them the way you might sit with the familiar sounds of any well-known space, neither ignoring them nor closely attending to them, just present with them, available if anything changes. What you are watching for, in the practical sense, is change. Any change in the pattern of sounds. Any sound that does not fit the established texture of the night, that has a quality of proximity that the other sounds lack, or a directionality that suggests something is moving toward the camp rather than past it. Any change in the fire, a gust that might blow a spark onto the sleeping area, or a sudden collapse of the fuel arrangement that would require adjustment, you are also watching for nothing in particular. This is the other part of the night watch that you have observed in the older man, and that you are now experiencing yourself, the long hours of simply being awake in the dark with the fire and the sleeping people around you, not doing anything specifically, not requiring anything to happen, just maintaining the presence that the group needs to have, even when it is not called upon. This is a form of care that does not announce itself. It is not the care that requires acknowledgement or that leaves visible evidence. It is the care that works by preventing things, by being the difference between an uneventful night and a night where something goes wrong that someone awake might have prevented. Most of the time, nothing goes wrong, and the care is invisible, its effect indistinguishable from the ordinary fact of an uneventful night. But the invisibility of effective care is not the same as its absence, and the older man knows this, and you are learning it, sitting in the firelight with the sleeping people around you and the dark beyond. You think, in the long hours of the watch, about the people you came from, not in the organized way of deliberate memory, but in the associative way of thoughts that come when the demands of the day are absent and the mind is free to go where it goes. Your mother appears first, in the specific way that mothers appear in the memories of people who are far from them, not as a whole person but as a series of sensory fragments, a particular quality of voice, the specific smell of her clothing, the way her hands moved when she was doing particular things. Then others, people from the camp you came from, people from the groups that intersected with your camp in the years of your growing up, faces and voices and gestures, the accumulated catalogue of people who were part of the world before this crossing. Some of these people are gone. This is the ordinary condition of any adult life, the accumulation of losses, the gradual building of the category of people who were here and are no longer here. Each loss has its own weight, its own specific quality. The losses of the very old are different from the losses of the young, the expected different from the unexpected, the distant different from the close. You carry all of them with you the way you carry everything else, not always in the front of your attention, not always accessible, but present, part of the weight of the person you have become. In the firelight, in the quiet of the night watch, some of these people feel closer than they do in the walking hours. The day is too busy for this kind of closeness. The sensory demands of navigation and terrain and weather and the condition of the people around you fill the attention so completely that the internal space for this other kind of company is not available. But at night, with the attention requirements reduced to the simple task of watching and listening and keeping the fire, the internal space opens and the internal company comes. You are not alone. This is what the night watch teaches, sitting in the dark with the sleeping people around you, that you are never, in the sense that matters most, alone. The people here are with you, and the people behind you are with you in the way that people are with you when you carry the specific sensory memories of them, and the people ahead, the ones you have not yet met, the people in the eastern land, who will be your neighbours, and in some cases your kin, they are with you, in the way that possibilities are with you, present as orientation even before they become present as fact. The fire burns. The night deepens, then begins, imperceptibly, to lighten. The specific quality of dark that is the hour before dawn is different from the specific quality of dark that is the middle of the night, different in a way that you have learned to read in the way you read all things that matter, by paying attention long enough to build the model. The older man stirs. He does not wake fully, but he shifts, pulling closer the fur that covers him, and makes a small sound that is somewhere between sleep and waking, and you understand from this sound that he is checking in the unconscious way that people who have been responsible for others for a long time check in, even when they are sleeping. A quick sweep of awareness across the available information a confirmation that everything is as it should be, then back down into the sleep. You feel, sitting here, something that you do not have a word for in any language you know, because it is not a feeling that the language has had reason to name. It is the specific feeling of being trusted with someone else's sleep, of having been given, temporarily, the responsibility for the safety of people who cannot protect themselves because they are vulnerable in the way that all sleeping people are vulnerable, and of having received that trust and being adequate to it. It is not a dramatic feeling. It is a quiet one, a settled one, a feeling that belongs to the category of things that are more important than they appear from the outside, that matter in the particular way that the unspectacular necessary things matter, the way that water matters, and warmth, and the reliability of the ground under your feet. The first grey of dawn arrives at the eastern edge of the sky. You put the last piece of wood on the fire. The wood catches slowly, building toward the brightness that will sustain itself until the morning sun makes the fire unnecessary. The night is ending. The watch is almost done. You have kept it well. Soon the camp will wake, the morning sounds will begin, the day will assemble itself from the elements of sleeping people becoming waking people, and the process of moving through the world will resume. But for now, for a few more minutes, there is just the fire and the dawn and the sleeping faces and the particular stillness of the world at the exact moment when night has finished its work and day has not yet begun its. This stillness is a gift. You do not need to do anything with it except be in it. Be in it. It is enough. Before any human walked this way, the corridor was already a crossing. The land bridge has been here, in one form or another, for most of the past 2 million years, appearing when the glacials were at their deepest and the sea was at its lowest, disappearing when the warm periods between glacials raised the sea again and swallowed the connection, reappearing with the next glacial, a pulsing corridor that has opened and closed repeatedly across deep time, each opening allowing a new exchange between the two great land masses it connects. What crossed in those earlier openings is a story told by fossils. The horses that are native to North America, that evolved there, that diversified there over millions of years into dozens of species, crossed this corridor going west, into Asia, and then into Europe, and then into Africa, becoming the wild horses of the old world, the ancestors of every domesticated horse that will ever be ridden or worked. The camels, which are also North American in their origins, crossed the same way west through Beringia into Asia, south into the Middle East and Africa, where they will become the animals that make possible the great desert civilizations of the ancient world. Mammoths crossed east. They came from Africa originally, the great elephants that gave rise to the woolly mammoths of the north. They moved north through Asia in the warm periods, adapted over hundreds of thousands of years to the cold grasslands of the northern latitudes, and eventually crossed Beringia into North America, where their descendants became the Columbian mammoths of the south and the woolly mammoths you see around you now. Bison crossed the same way, east through the corridor, into North America, where they diversified and became the great herds that will eventually number in the tens of millions and sustain the cultures of the Great Plains for thousands of years. Big cats, short-faced bears, saber-toothed cats from North America moving west, and cave lions from Eurasia moving east. The corridor, over its 2-million-year history, has been one of the great highways of evolution, the passage through which the two biological worlds of the Old and New World have repeatedly exchanged their most successful experiments, and plants. The wind carries seeds across open water, but the land bridge allows more than wind-borne travel. It allows the spread of plants that need soil and time, and the gradual advance of a seed bank, plants that cannot cross ocean barriers but that move readily across continuous land. The grasslands of Beringia are themselves a product of this exchange, a mix of species that have come from both directions, that have found in this corridor a habitat where their different evolutionary histories can coexist and, over time, become integrated into a single functional ecosystem. You are one of many things that have crossed this corridor. In the long story of Beringia, you are one of the most recent. The humans who crossed are, in geological terms, almost the last chapter, arriving when the corridor is already in its final period of existence, when the sea is already beginning its slow advance. The animals crossed for hundreds of thousands of years before the first human arrived here. The plants colonized the exposed ground as it appeared at the beginning of each glacial, filling the bare mud of the newly exposed seafloor with the particular tough pioneer communities of the cold steppe. In this long view, you are both participant and witness. You are the latest in a procession of living things that have used this passage to expand their range, to find new territory, to respond to the pressure of competition or climate, or simple biological restlessness by moving in the direction where there is more. You are doing what the mammoths did, what the horses did, what the bison did, following the logic of available space and available resources in the direction they lead. But you are also something those earlier crossers were not. You are aware of the crossing as a crossing, not with the full historical awareness of what Beringia is in the context of 2 million years of biological exchange. You do not have that context. It will not be assembled until thousands of years from now. But you have some awareness, however rough and practical in its form, that you are moving from one world to another, that the land behind you is different from the land ahead, that this middle ground is a kind of between place that belongs fully to neither side. The horses who crossed did not know they were crossing. The mammoths did not know they were making history. They were just following the grass, going where the conditions were adequate for survival, making the moment-by-moment decisions that add up, in aggregate, to migration, to the spread of a species across a new continent. You are also following the grass, in the sense that the logic of your movement is the same practical logic: where is their food, where is their shelter, where is the resource base sufficient to sustain the group. But you are also, in some additional layer of awareness, making a decision. Not the dramatic decision of a person who has carefully weighed alternatives and chosen the best one. A quieter decision, more like the gradual commitment to a direction that has been tested over many steps and found to hold weight. This distinction between the animal that crosses without knowing it is crossing and the human that crosses with some awareness, however incomplete, of what the crossing means is one of the things that makes the human crossing of Beringia unique in the long history of the corridor. Every other species that used this passage was, in a sense, passive before the logic of their biology. The humans who crossed were active in the sense that they were making choices, accumulating knowledge about the crossing as they made it, passing that knowledge forward to the people who came after them. The knowledge that you carry in your head about this crossing, what the terrain is like, where the rivers cross best, where the animals concentrate in which seasons, is not your knowledge alone. It is the accumulated knowledge of everyone who came before you on this route and found ways to communicate what they had learned. It has been added to and corrected and refined by each person who had access to it, and you have added to it in turn, and you will pass it on to whoever comes after you, either directly through teaching or indirectly through the lived example of how someone who knows this route moves through it. This is the uniquely human contribution to the story of Beringia. Not the crossing itself, the crossing was done by many species across deep time, but the cumulative knowledge of the crossing, the compounding of information across generations, the way that each crossing is slightly better informed than the one before because the people making it have access, through teaching and story and the observation of those who have made it before, to information that they could not have gathered from their own experience alone. This compounding of knowledge is slow. It takes many generations to build a reliable picture of a route as long and variable as the Beringia crossing. And the knowledge can be lost as well as gained a group that fails to survive, or that loses contact with a group that has the specific knowledge, takes that knowledge with it. The accumulation is not linear, not guaranteed, not protected against catastrophic loss. But over the long stretch of the time when humans were using this corridor, the knowledge grew. The crossing became better understood, the hazards better mapped, the resource locations better known. And the people who came later, including you, benefited from all of that accumulated understanding, carried in the memories of the older man and in the general shared knowledge of your people about how to move through this kind of terrain. You are, in this sense, the heir of everyone who came before you. Not by blood alone, though by blood, certainly, in the way that each generation inherits the biology of the generations before it, but also by knowledge, by the accumulated understanding of the world that has been building since the first humans looked at the world and began, systematically, to try to understand what they were seeing. You do not know all of what you know. This is always the condition of accumulated cultural knowledge. Much of it has been integrated so thoroughly that it no longer presents itself as knowledge, but as the way things are, the obvious texture of the world, the background that you were born into rather than the information you consciously acquired. The fact that you find the cold here more manageable than a person without any cold climate experience would find it is not entirely the product of your personal experience. It is also the product of everything your people learned about cold over the generations before you were born, the knowledge that informed how you were raised, what you were taught to do, what clothing you learned to make and how you learned to make it. All of that is in you. All of that came from the crossing. From many crossings, from the accumulated experience of a people who have been moving through the cold north for so long that the cold north is home, is the expected condition, is the default world. You carry it all with you. The horse knowledge and the river knowledge and the fire knowledge and the star knowledge and the tool knowledge and the plant knowledge, all of it layered and integrated, and available in ways that are sometimes conscious and often not, sometimes articulable and often beyond language, part of what you are, in the way that your skeleton is part of what you are, not separable, not optional, the very structure on which the rest of you is built. The corridor has made you. The crossing is completing you. And what you carry east, when the crossing is done, is not just your body and your tools and your family. It is everything that made the crossing possible, all of the knowledge that will make the eastern world habitable for the people who come from you. The grass bends in the wind, the sky is enormous and pale. The older man walks ahead reading the landscape. You carry what you carry. It is enough. It has always been enough. Let it be enough now, tonight, as you drift down into the deep rest that carries its own knowledge, the knowledge of the body that sleep is safe and rest is possible, and that tomorrow will have what it needs when it arrives. Cross now into sleep the way you cross everything carefully, with attention, trusting the ground to hold you. It will hold you. It always does. Home is not a place, or not primarily a place. You understand this now in a way that you could not have understood it before the crossing began, because the crossing has separated you from every physical location you have ever associated with home, and yet home has not disappeared. It has travelled with you. In the camp on the 5th night of the crossing, when the wind came up hard from the northwest and the temperature dropped faster than expected, you made the camp in whatever shelter was available, and the woman built the fire and the children came close to the fire, and the older man sat in his characteristic position at the edge of the group's warmth. And for a moment, a specific moment that you can still find if you look for it, you felt the thing that you feel in a good camp at the end of a hard day, the feeling that could only be called home feeling. And you were somewhere in the middle of a land bridge that will be underwater in 3,000 years with nothing around you but grass and cold and the vast impersonal steppe. Home, it turns out, is the arrangement. It is the particular configuration of people and warmth and the feeling of enough shelter, enough food, enough people around you who know who you are, that the body recognizes as the place it is supposed to be. The specific location is secondary to this arrangement. What the body needs is not the particular view from a particular hillside, but the feeling of being in right relationship with the things that matter. This understanding is not new. People who move through the world have always known it, in the practical sense of people who have never had the option of being rooted in a single place. The home that travels with you is older than the home that stays in one place. The domestication of place, the settlement, the village, the city, the fixed address, is a later development, something that came after the long millennia of movement, something built on top of the older understanding of home as a felt quality rather than a location. But knowing something in the practical sense and knowing it in the felt sense are different, and the crossing has moved this knowledge from the first category into the second for you. You know now, in your body, that home is portable, that it assembles wherever the right elements are present, that the fire tonight and the fire on the other side of this corridor are the same fire in the sense that matters, that the warmth and the safety and the presence of the people you travel with create the same home feeling in both places, and that the specific place is the variable and the feeling is the constant. This is not the same as saying that place does not matter. Place matters enormously. The older man's attachment to the territory he grew up in, the way his memory of specific places is layered with decades of experience and meaning, is real and deep, and not reducible to a feeling that could be replicated elsewhere. The places where significant things happen to you, the places where you learned something important or lost someone or found something you needed, those places carry a specific weight that other places do not. Place matters, but the essential thing travels. The essential thing is in the arrangement, in the people, in the quality of the fire. And understanding this, having felt it in the body rather than only knowing it in the mind, makes the crossing lighter. Not easy. Nothing about a 3-week walk through cold open country is easy. But lighter, in the sense that the weight of distance from home is reduced when you understand that home is not as far away as it seems. The woman understands this completely, in the way that people understand things they have always known. She is the most homemaking of the group, not in any domestic or gendered sense, but in the sense of being the one who is most consistently responsible for the conditions that make the group feel like a group, rather than a collection of individuals in proximity. She notices when someone is cold before they say so. She manages the fire in ways that account for not just warmth, but the quality of warmth, the difference between a fire that heats the body and a fire that heats the spirit, which is a real difference that only someone paying close attention to both fires and people would think to make. She was the one who understood. On the third night, when everything was wet and the wood was damp and the fire kept threatening to go out, that what was needed was not just fire, but the felt confidence that fire was possible, that the situation was manageable, that things would be adequate. She built the fire, and she kept it going, and she did it with a calmness that communicated something beyond the technical fact of the fire, communicated that this was under control, that this was within the range of things that could be handled, that the group was not in the kind of trouble that required alarm. That is homemaking. Not the fire itself, but what the fire means in the hands of someone who knows what they are doing with it. What will home look like on the other side of this corridor? You do not know. The Eastern Land is unknown to you in its specifics. You know its general character from what the older man has told you and what you learned from the people at the lake 2 days ago, but the specific place where the group will settle, where the children will grow up, where the arrangement of home will be built into a specific landscape instead of carried through an undifferentiated step that is ahead of you, beyond the knowledge that any person you have spoken to has been able to give you. The not knowing does not frighten you. Or rather, it produces something that might be called concern, in a quiet background register. The reasonable awareness that unknowns exist, and that some of them might be difficult, but not fear in any acute sense. The crossing has done something to your relationship with the unknown. You have been in the unknown for 23 days, and you are still here, and the unknown has been, on balance, manageable, not easy, not without difficulty, but within the range of what the group's combined knowledge and resources could handle. This is confidence, but not the confidence of someone who expects things to be easy. It is the confidence that comes from having handled difficult things and found yourself adequate to them. It is the confidence of earned capability, which is different from the confidence of assumed capability and much more durable. You carry it east. The Eastern Land does not know you yet, does not know the shape of your footstep, or the smell of your fire, or the sound of the children's voices in the early morning, but it will learn these things. Slowly, over the seasons you will spend in it, over the years of walking its rivers and learning its animals, and finding the places where the ground is right for camping, and the places where the grass is best, and the places where the water is clean, over all of that slow accumulation of specific knowledge, the land will become known to you, and you will become known to it, in the way that places and people become known to each other when they are in each other's presence long enough. And the home feeling will assemble itself in the Eastern Land the same way it has assembled itself in every camp of this crossing, from the fire and the warmth and the people and the accumulated rightness of enough. It will take time. It will take seasons. But it will happen, because it always happens, because home is not the place you came from, but the place you make. And the making is a practice, not a discovery. The grass bends in the evening wind. The fire of tonight is building from the coals of last night. The children are asleep before the stars come fully out. The older man is looking at the sky with his characteristic expression of satisfied attention. You are home, right now, in the middle of Beringia, in the middle of a crossing that has 23 days behind it, and whatever comes next ahead of it. You are home. You are here. The fire burns. The night is quiet. Let the home feeling do its work now. Let it settle into the muscles and the bones, the particular relaxation that comes when the body recognizes that it is where it is supposed to be. You are where you are supposed to be. Rest. The final morning of crossing arrives the same way every other morning has arrived, gradually, without announcement, the darkness in the east becoming different from the darkness in the west, by a degree that is at first impossible to name and then impossible to miss. You have been watching mornings arrive for your entire life. In the camp where you grew up, in the winter camps and summer camps, and the temporary camps of travel, through the whole long sequence of mornings that makes up a life, you have been watching this particular transition since before you had words for it. Watching it the way the body watches things it depends on before the mind knows enough to name the dependence. This morning is different from those mornings in a way you can feel but not articulate. The light is the same pale greying of the eastern sky, the same gradual emergence of the landscape from the general darkness into specific forms, grass and ridge, and the suggestion of water to the north. The cold is the same cold, perhaps a few degrees cooler than the mornings earlier in the crossing, the season having continued its slow turn toward winter in the weeks since you began. The sounds are the same sounds, but you are different, or something in the relationship between you and this landscape is different. You have been crossing it for 23 days. You know it now in the body knowledge way of someone who has walked a terrain rather than looked at it from a distance, knows the particular density of the air here, the way the wind patterns in the late afternoon, the specific smells that accompany specific weather, the sound that the ground makes under your foot on frozen mornings versus thawed ones. This knowledge will not be useful in the eastern land. The eastern land has its own specific character, its own patterns of wind and water and animal movement and seasonal change, and you will have to learn it from the beginning, which is a thing you are capable of and will do, but the learning will take time, and the beginning will be the beginning, the particular vulnerability of being in a place you do not yet know. But right now, for this last morning, you are in a place you know. You have paid it the attention that creates knowledge, the sustained, close attention of a person moving slowly through a landscape and needing to understand it in order to move through it safely. And the landscape has given you what landscapes give to people who attend to them in this way, a specific familiarity, a sense of the place's character, the feeling of being slightly, provisionally, at home. You stand in the morning and look west one more time. Not in grief, you will not describe this moment as grief, because grief requires a loss, and you have not lost anything that was yours in any permanent sense. But in the specific awareness that this landscape, which you have been moving through for 23 days and which has become familiar to you in the most literal sense of that word, is something you will not see again. The ground you are standing on will be under the sea in 3,000 years. The grass will be gone, the rivers will be drowned. The ridge to the north will be an underwater elevation on the floor of the Bering Sea. The older man who is standing behind you will be bones in the ground somewhere in the eastern land, and the woman and the children will be bones too, and you will be bones, and the world that remembers any specific thing about this morning will be a world that does not exist yet, and will not exist for thousands of years. And yet the morning is here. The cold is real. The grass is real. The faint light in the east is real and growing, the way mornings always grow, not suddenly but continuously, each moment slightly brighter than the last, until the moment when you realize the light is here, and you cannot say when it arrived. This is what you carry east. Not the land, you cannot carry land. Not the grass or the cold or the specific smell of Beringia on a still morning, because these are things of this place and they will stay here when you go, but the knowledge of them, the felt sense of them, the way the morning of Beringia looks and smells and feels when you are standing in it for the last time, and you carry the fact of the crossing itself, the 23 days of it, the rivers and the fires and the animals and the stars and the people you are travelling with, the mammoth at dawn, the old hearth with its split stones, the reed beds and the shallow lake and the people with the fish net, the wide river and the way the older man paused in the middle of it and came through, the children asleep in the firelight, the stars overhead on the still nights, in their thousands, turning slowly. All of this is part of you now. Not as memory exactly memories are unreliable, subject to revision, vulnerable to forgetting, as something more embedded than memory, as the specific shape of who you are now, shaped by the 23 days in the way that a river is shaped by its course, the channel it has taken through the landscape, leaving its trace in the rock and the sediment, and the particular way the water moves. You are the crossing's trace. Its imprint on a person, as the crossing itself will become an imprint on the land and the genome and the stories and the culture of all the people who came before and came after and will come after them. The corridor will be underwater, but its trace will be everywhere, in the languages of 2 continents, in the faces of billions of people, in the distribution of human blood types across the globe, in the genetic markers that future scientists will use to reconstruct the routes of ancient migrations, with a precision that would astonish anyone moving through this landscape right now. The sun has cleared the eastern horizon. The light has shifted from the grey of pre-dawn to the pale gold of early morning, and the grass has shifted with it, from grey-green to gold-green, the individual seed heads catching the low sun and holding it in a way that makes the whole steppe shimmer faintly, as though it is slightly more alive than it was a moment ago. The older man begins to move. His pack goes on in the efficient, practiced way of someone for whom this action has been done so many thousands of times that it requires no thought. The woman is already standing, already oriented toward the east. The older girl is looking east with her characteristic forward attention. The younger boy is looking at something in the grass near his feet, some small thing that has caught his attention and that he will look at for as long as it takes to understand it before he rejoins the group. You put on your pack. The familiar weight settles against your back and shoulders, the weight you have been carrying for 23 days, every ounce of it known and accounted for. The walking begins, as it always begins, as it will continue, in some form, for the rest of your life, because walking is what you do. It is the primary mode of your being in the world. It is the way you have always moved through the world, and the way you will move through it until the body that is walking decides it has done enough. But not yet. Not for a long time yet. Right now the body is adequate, and the morning is here, and the eastern land is drawing you toward it with the reliable gravity of the next thing, the next place, the next morning that will arrive as this one has arrived gradually, without announcement, the darkness becoming light in the particular patient way of mornings that have been doing this since long before there was anyone to notice them doing it. Walk into it. The eastern land is receiving you. The grass is receiving each step. The cold air receives each breath you give it, and takes it up into the sky where it disperses and becomes part of the air of this entire corridor, the air of Beringia, the air that smells of salt and cold and living grass. You take the last steps on the land that will disappear. You take the first steps on the land that will remain. There is no line. There is only the walking, the continuous walking, the ground receiving each foot as it comes and releasing it as it rises and receiving the next one. This is how all crossings end, and all arrivals begin. This is how it has always been done. Walk on. The morning is here. The world is large and receiving, and patient beyond any ability to measure patience. Walk on, and let the night that is coming, the comfortable night that is waiting at the end of this telling, the night of your bed, and your warmth and your breathing receive you as the eastern land received the first people who walked into it, gladly, without conditions, with the whole patient length of the rest of the night ahead, and nothing required of you but this, to close your eyes, to let the walking slow, to let the ground beneath you be the ground you know, the ground that has held you every night of your life. The crossing is complete. Rest now. The ground holds you. Sleep. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, as it really helps us continue making more content. Anyways, see you in the next one, and now let the walk end. You have been traveling for a long time, longer than you know, not just across these 23 days of crossing, not just through the corridor of grass and wind and cold water, but through the whole long evening of this story, through all the mornings and the river crossings and the fires and the stars. You have been moving through a world that is gone now, a world that exists only in the sediment of the sea floor and the genes of living people and the stories that survived the translation, and you have been moving through it at the only pace this kind of journey can be done slowly, with attention, one step at a time. That is enough now. The walking is done. Let the ground beneath you be still. Let it be the ground you know, your floor, your bed, the particular surface that your body has learned to trust over many nights of returning to it. Let it be solid and warm and completely still. The grasses of Beringia are sleeping. They have been sleeping for 12,000 years, under the water, and they sleep soundly, completely. The absolute sleep of things that have no reason to wake. The mammoth is sleeping too, somewhere in the permafrost of Siberia, perfectly preserved, his great coat still intact, his curved tusks still in the earth where they came to rest, waiting without impatience for whatever comes next. The older man is sleeping. He has been sleeping for a very long time. His bones are somewhere in the ground of somewhere, under the roots of something, or the stone of something, or the water of something, returned to the earth with the same lack of ceremony that characterized everything else about the life he lived. He is at peace. He was at peace. He was at peace from the first moment he stopped having to carry the knowledge of where to go next. The girl who looked east is also sleeping. Her children's children's children are awake in a world she could not have imagined, living under skies she would have recognized, walking ground she never saw, carrying in their cells the memory of a crossing they will never consciously know they made. They are alive, many of them. They are alive tonight, wherever tonight finds them. Some of them also perhaps listening to a voice in the dark. Some of them also finding their way, one step at a time, toward the sleep they need. The bridge is gone. The water is there. The stars are the same stars. You are lying down. You are already mostly there, the place the crossing leads to, the place that is not east or west, but simply down, down into the quiet, down into the long dark rest that waits at the end of every day and every walk and every story. The grass is still. The wind has stopped for the night. The fire is coals, breathing slowly, orange in the dark, reliable and warm. You do not need to go anywhere. You do not need to find the next camp or read the next sky or cross the next river. Everything that needed to happen has happened. Everything you needed to carry, you have carried. The rest is not your responsibility. The rest belongs to the people who will wake up tomorrow and the day after, and the 1,000 days after that, and they will do what needs to be done then, and they will be fine, and the world will go on in its slow, patient way, making room for whatever comes next. The corridor is underwater. The mammoths are gone. The older man and the girl and the boy and the woman are all, by now, returned to the earth. Everything that was specific about them is gone. Everything that mattered about them is here in the world they helped make, in the people who came from them, in the fact that you are here, right now, in a world that would not exist in exactly this form if they had not crossed. That is not nothing. That is everything. Sleep now. The ground will hold you. The dark will keep you. The stars will turn overhead in their patient arc, as they have turned over every sleeping person since sleeping persons first lay down under stars, and when the light comes, it will find you here, rested, carrying a little of Beringia in you, in the ways that all of us carry all the crossings ever made by the people who became us. Sleep, the grass bends, the water rises, the world turns. You are here. If you like this video, let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious about that, and if you have a suggested topic, feel free to leave it in the comments.